prison. I cower at the thought of other people's expectations, and yet still hand over a mind to them. Travel where you are. Tourism is sin. These are the ruins we left behind. You can't take pictures of them if what they say is true.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It's Thursday, August 9th, 2018. My name is Michael Brooks, and I'm Michael Thursday, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We're broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America. Downtown Brooklyn, USA. On today's program, Brian Mier of Brasil Wire. Election approaching in Brazil in October. Lula still in prison, but a new strategy from his party. We'll talk about what's happening in Brazil, its regional and global implications, and a path forward for restoring democracy and broadening rights. Also, Fox News and the Trump administration, they're getting even more overt about white nationalism, if that was even remotely possible. Well, Laura Ingraham is showing us how. Mike Pompeo is telling the North Koreans to cut their arsenal by between 60 and 70%, as apparently the far-right Secretary of State is the detail guy on the North Korea deal, even as the administration promises a ramp-up of catastrophic and dangerous sanctions against Iran. Representative Chris Collins, who was indicted on insider trading, well, you know what he was really up to? Trying to decrease human suffering through innovation and the market, obviously. Speaking of innovation, Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State of Kansas, he's not going to recuse himself in the recount in his Republican primary. So that's interesting. Just want to remind everybody that the guy has built his whole career on nativist, racist conspiracy theories about voter fraud. Interesting. New York City Council passes the first-in-the-nation cap on Uber and Lyft, including a minimum wage for the car share companies. Jim Brune has withdrawn from the Sinclair merger, saying that it will sue for breach of contract. Ajit Pai getting skittish. And Gary Cohn has some thoughts about social media and social media companies that is such a stupid comparison that it will make you defend them for one split second. And new research shows that, yes, in the very rare instances where there are punishments for free speech on campuses, guess who it affects, everybody? Well, if you're watching the show and you know anything, you would probably correctly anticipate that the answer is left-wingers. And also we have just depressing news on Puerto Rico to get to. All of that and more on today's Majority Report. Brendan on the boards.
Ones and twos.
Brendan's on the ones and twos.
You forgot to say free Jordan Peterson.
Free Jordan Peterson as part of the ongoing increase of tensions between Saudi Arabia and Canada, the Saudis have found they have found their Solzhenitsyn of Canada. It's funny. I'm sure Peterson has said screw, or I assume he said some screw.
I'm defenseless against that kind of female insanity.
Exactly. That is an Arabic proverb.
Peterson has actually said free Raif Badawi, so...
Right. Yeah, I'm sure he has.
I missed that part.
Oh, yeah. Is that really true?
It is true, yeah.
Oh, wow. Well, good for him. Good for Jordan Peterson. All right, well, you took like 30% out of the cut we're going to get into him on later.
Yeah, exactly. You
But
still
that is
made
a
Saudi
good-
Arabia think you were a political prisoner by your nonsense about, pronouns.
This is true. The man said that the woman should not be a man, and then he was put in prison. Canada is a den of snakes and liars. Speaking of a den of snakes and liars, and I think that transition actually does work in all sorts of ways, Fox News. Remember when Laura Ingraham did that weird arm motion thing at the Republican National Committee in 2016? I don't know, guys. I'm sorry. I'm just thinking of this. It's totally spontaneous. So if you don't have it, don't worry about it because we didn't plan on it. Oh, okay. We do have it. Nice.
You mean the Ingraham angle, or the Ingram angle?
The Ingram angle.
It's about 30 degrees, maybe 40, a little bit short of 45.
I'm not saying it was an intentional angle, but
I
I'm
am
saying
suggesting it was.
I'm heavily implying it was. I'm saying it certainly has, if people are looking at this, this angle has, shall we say, historical echoes. It was a body posture that was reminiscent of a certain group of people.
It was oh so fleeting.
Oh, so fleeting. Dad would have been so proud. Laura Ingraham is just, yeah. I mean, she's somebody that in any rightly functioning society would be sort of begging some local FM outlet that was going under to let her have a white nationalist hour in between. I don't even know. I can't even think. Any profession I could think of that Laura Ingraham should be doing is an insult to that profession. So I won't even use an example. Here's Laura Ingraham, and it should be, put in context of something I'm sure that we're going to be covering more, but there's a lot of reporting, I believe it was an NBC report, and a lot of reporting indicating that the next wave of the ethnic cleansing war on people of color by the Republican Party in America is going to target quote-unquote legal immigrants. I'll put that in quotation marks just as I won't say illegal either. But immigrants who are here, who have done the paperwork. And the policy proposal is essentially that if you have ever benefited from any government program, anything from Obamacare to food stamps, so of course this would implicate, pretty much all Americans, you could be subject to deportation even if all of your work is here in order and you've been here for quite some time, obviously. That's in the pipeline. And of course, that's the real agenda of these people, some for ideological reasons, some for just engineering an electoral map that favors Republicans. This is Laura Ingraham, this sort of with letting the next phase of white nationalist propaganda out of the bag here, setting the stage for what we'll see probably around October, November from the administration.
Because in some parts of the country, it does seem like the America that we know and love doesn't exist anymore. Massive demographic changes have been foisted upon the American people. And they're changes that none of us ever voted for and most of us don't like. From Virginia to California, we see stark examples of how radically, in some ways, the country has changed. Now, much of this is related to both illegal and, in some cases, legal immigration that, of course, progressives love.
We love that. Actually, I do. I enjoy living in a more interesting, more broad-based society. But that's actually pretty irrelevant to the conversation here. The conversation is about rights and norms, racism versus not racism, and universal delivery and equity for everybody. So, and by the way, this is absolutely an area where there is a zero-sum game fight. There's no question in my mind that some in certain areas of the tensions around these issues could absolutely be influenced and impacted by addressing the structural inequality issues and issues of capitalism we have in this country. I just have no doubt about that. And I know that we need to deal with those issues regardless. And I also know that there is a group of people, of which Laura Ingraham and Donald Trump and every single Republican leader in Congress is a part of, who want a white ethno-state of a strong or soft variety. Maybe some people don't want to sort of legally resegregate the country. Maybe they just want, a sort of generally white place where everybody kind of informally, quote unquote, knows their place. Okay. And you won't have to be shocked by somebody speaking Spanish by you or whatever other nonsense that these idiots get up to. And then there's people who clearly are and in real positions of influence and power who are absolutely closer to a overt legislative white ethno-state end of things. And that, yes, that's a zero-sum game. Those people need to be absolutely destroyed politically. They need to be completely discredited culturally. And they need to, in people in our positions, be mocked, undermined, and destroyed in every cultural way, shape, and form, period. And then in the civic space, that's where people like Kristen Piccolini and others can, work on the emotional, psychological, cultural things and barriers that we're going to need to overcome to deal with these issues on the ground. But as a matter of politics, the inequality will influence it. And then there's just a whole bunch of people that are showing us the ball here who we need to destroy. There isn't even a subtext to untangle in that segment. She said it. And that's the enemy. So let's be on it.
This is the time.
That's it.
And always remember to just don't let these people walk this horse back into the barn in 2-3 years when they're talking about taxes and whistling it again instead of just saying this quiet part loud. You always have to remember these things.
Precisely. And I'm not, obviously that Rick Wilson, never Trump guy, I'm not particularly enamored of him. I'll give him credit for staying on that beat when a lot of other people have either sort of quieted down or admitted that, giving taxes to giving money to rich people is more important to them than all the other things they found uncouth about Trump. He stayed on that beat because apparently, to his credit, Trump's, racism and just being disgusting is sort of generally repulsive to him. But he actually said the other day in an interview, he said, and I'm paraphrasing him obviously, but he's like recognizing that a lot of Republicans are happy that they don't have to subtext this anymore. They're happy that they can give into their id on this stuff. And, of course, part of me is like, yeah, dude, we know. So why the fuck were you working to get them elected across the country? But that being said, I mean, again, credit where credit is due for being real about what's happening here.
Because most people actually, there's a reason they have to pretend, right? Because they need that chunk of people. And there are enough, but now they're realizing that, okay, we've kind of maybe hit diminishing returns with those people. There's all these other people we've been neglecting with couching these things in softer terms that we can make up for. And I think it's definitely a short-term desperation play because I think most people don't like this stuff.
I don't think they do either. And I think that is I think that, of course, these issues are very complex and there's a massive amount of, bias and racism across the board. But one way in which, yes, I agree with you. I think most people, including people who might be pretty bad on some issues and might possess some very unhelpful attitudes, and there might be work to do or whatever, but in a functional political sense, yeah, I don't think most normal people like this stuff. And I think even when we looked at that Trump focus group, there was the guy who apologized for voting for Trump, and there was also that middle-aged white dude who was just like, why did he call LeBron stupid? And, again, we could say like, hey, buddy, like, what were you listening to the whole campaign? And that's a fair point. But at the same time, great. If it takes the LeBron tweet to get it, and he's going to flip and vote the right way, and he sees things clearly, awesome. Welcome aboard, at least for this specific battle.
And my point is, like, often it's not really the what they call the inciting event, like a LeBron tweet. It's really how that event is received in their social groups. And so that guy probably has friends that are like Cavs fans or something. I don't know. They have season tickets, right? Like it could be something as petty as that.
Totally.
And I think that's why in the long term, it's better to be a good person and not racist and those sort and for the people, because I think it does. I think people actually do come. I don't think people are walking away from the left. I think people are walking away maybe to like apathy. That's what the right wants. If
that's
they
what they want.
Right.
I don't think most people respond to a bunch of ghouls and sociopaths, monsters and unhinged idiots ranting and raving about, community leaders and athletes and defending kidnapping children and putting them in cages. Most normal people don't respond to that. And that does speak well of them. And yes, if you're on the left, you must have a broad optimism about people. All right, we are going to be right back with Brian Mier from the Brasil Wire on the Majority Report. Welcome back to the Majority Report. I'm Michael Brooks. Joining us now is Brian Mier. Brian Mier, he is the editor of the Brasil Wire, an editor for Brasil Wire, and he's an American who's resided in Brazil for 22 years. Brian, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks, Michael. How's it going?
It's going really well. I'm glad to be talking with you. People who watch or listen to me on Majority Report or watch and listen to me on the Michael Brooks Show know that I am a very attentive follower of Brazil, strong supporter of Lula, somebody who was also a big admirer. I think the case of Marielle Franco is also incredibly important, and I think that Brazil is important in and of itself, and I think that the dynamics playing there are, parallel a lot of other very important situations in the world today. And I've really appreciated your work and help sort of orienting me to what's going on the ground there. So thank you for being here. Let's work backwards a little bit. There's a context for what's happening in Brazil, but let's start with the events of really the past week. What did Lula's Workers' Party decide to do with regards to nominating him for president, which he still leads in the polls, and a so-called Plan B if the courts still thwart him? What's the electoral play that the Workers' Party has come up with?
Okay, well, we're currently living in kind of a state of exception in terms of law, and the law's been manipulated in all kinds of ways. And so the electoral courts pulled a maneuver last week requiring all parties to report who their vice president would be early. And they gave this order out like on Sunday, so that all parties had to come up with a vice president on their ticket by midnight Sunday night. And so the PT's strategy,
which is the Workers' Party, just to tell
people. Yeah, the Workers'. No
problem. PT is Workers' Party. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, their strategy has been to wait until the last possible moment to register Lula's candidacy, because for his candidacy to be barred, it's going to take a while in the court systems. And so the longer that they wait to register, the bigger the chance that they won't be able to cancel his candidacy until after the elections, which would be a big problem for the conservatives. So they had this pressure put on them, and they came up with the idea that they would announce former São Paulo Mayor Fernando Haddad as his vice president candidate, with a stipulation that if he's allowed to run officially when he registers on the 15th of August, he'll change his vice president candidate to communist state senator from Rio Grande do Sul, Manuela Dávila. And if he's not allowed to run, then Haddad will be the presidential candidate, and Manuela Dávila will be the vice presidential candidate for him. So either way you look at it, Manuela Dávila will be the VP candidate.
And she's of the Communist Party in Brazil. So what does this move say about the kind of, because there's also, the other sort of understanding I have of Brazil is that the left has been very fractured, and Lula is kind of generally, first of all, he's the most popular politician in the country, and he also seems to be the one that could kind of generally unite the left, do the best job of that. So what does this sort of triple play say about the left unifying, and specifically the role of the Communist Party with the Workers' Party in this climate of, being outside of the rule of law, essentially?
Okay, first of all, there's this kind of myth in the North that Lula fragmented the left party and that the left was being really divided, but it's not really true. If you look back, there's one political party that's been making a lot of noise about the left being fragmented in the past, which is called PSOL. It's the Socialism and Liberty Party. But this is their electoral rhetoric, because inside of Congress, they always sided with the PT. And now their presidential candidate is openly supporting Lula's right to run. And the left is more united than it's been in like 20 years at this point. That being said, the Brazilian Communist Party is not really a radical left party. They're center left. They're like social democrats, even though, they're not arguing about seizing the means of production and creating a dictatorship of the proletariat or anything. They're talking about, more funding for education and better public health system. So despite their name, they're essentially a solid center-left political party that has its roots in a big labor union federation called the CTB, and in the National Residents Association Confederation, which is the second largest urban social movement in Brazil. So they have a strong base. They're a medium-sized party, and they've been pretty faithful to the PT for the last 30 years. Although they do have their roots in the armed struggle against the military dictatorship. During the dictatorship, they were a Maoist guerrilla organization.
That's fascinating. So we're going to get back. We're going to get to the roots of this in a second. But just on the final note, obviously, Lula has been in prison for several months. The Brazilian media has drastically limited his ability to communicate to the general public, which even in and of itself is odd. This is my understanding is, sometimes in Brazil, as an example, people who've, headed like drug cartels could do a TV interview from prison. They've not allowed Lula to communicate. But through, his meetings with his lawyers and others, and sort of mapping strategy for the party, and also what Haddad has said, as well as Manuela, what kind of issues are they talking about, both in terms of, I would assume, running against austerity, but are they also talking about taking on some of the structural issues in Brazil, like media concentration, that help sort of, lead this sort of right-wing, right-wing coup, I guess we could call it, going back for the last several years. Some of the areas that were more fundamental and structural in Brazilian society and Brazilian oligarchy that weren't put into play before. Are they talking about that?
Yeah, yes, they are. The big battle right now is, and all of the left and center-left parties are saying the same thing that are running candidates, is to revert the privatizations and structural adjustments that were pushed through after the 2016 coup. The Brazilian left is unanimous in calling what happened in 2016 a coup. And the top issue is this: reverting the neoliberal reforms that were made to workers' rights, and reverting the privatization of the Petrobras Petroleum Company, and undoing the constitutional amendment that was passed, freezing public health and education spending for 20 years. So that's the top issue. However, Fernando Haddad gave a press conference yesterday, and he was talking about this issue with media concentration and the media oligarchies. Now, you can make a lot of criticism about the PT governments, and a lot of members of PT themselves are very critical of their own government. They never had more than 22% of Congress. And so it's a different situation in the US where you have a president and he has a majority vote. They always had to try and get things done by coalitions. And one of their biggest mistakes was not trying to break up the media monopolies. And everyone realizes this now. And so Haddad was talking about this yesterday. And it's not just a question of breaking up monopolies. The big media companies in Brazil receive funding from the federal government, a lot of funding in advertising money. And this is something that Globo Television Organization is the biggest media organization in Brazil, and it's one of the biggest open-air TV networks in the world. After the coup, President Michel Temer increased funding for them by like 50%. And they receive millions and millions of dollars a year from the government. The least that PT could do, or any left candidate who wins the election in October could do, would be to stop giving them so much money.
Right. Stop subsidizing the opposition.
Subsidized.
Let's first we'll get to the events. I think starting maybe in 2014 and Dilma's government and this anti-corruption drive, and get into that. But looping back to the beginning for a minute, let's talk about Lula's time in office, because one of the things that's striking to me about it, as you said, that both for very practical reasons, in terms of their ability to maneuver parliament, the concentrations of power in Brazilian society and politics, and also it seems, and maybe in some ways, Lula's own instincts. This is not at all a radical government. It was, in my read, an incredibly successful social democratic one that did seriously improve a lot of people's lives, and Lula obviously has an incredibly unique political talent. But it was not something that, plenty of oligarchs could have been satisfied. And in fact, many of them did incredibly well in the Lula years because commodity prices were booming. The BRIC nations were incredibly well positioned in that kind of 2003 to 2010 period, even during the economic meltdown. Is that read right? I mean, what was Lula's presidency actually like, and why would these people be so? I mean, is it just like in the United States, even the most moderate, centrist Obama style kind of approach freaks out the right-wing billionaire class? I mean, what is it?
Okay, I think your assessment is correct. I lived here during that entire time. This idea that like Lula betrayed the left, it's perpetrated by these kind of radical vanguard leftist intellectuals. But the fact is, the PT pretty much disassociated itself from being a radical left party in the early 1990s. And Lula sent a letter to the Brazilian people about 8 months before the elections, in which he explained, this government is not going to be that far left. I have to deal with the international financial institutions if I'm going to get elected. So everyone knew And he went up and met with the people at the World Bank and the IMF and told them that he wasn't going to default on their loans, before he ran for office, to placate the markets. If he hadn't done that, he wouldn't have been allowed to take the presidency. And so he started with a government that was trapped into these conditionality agreements because of IMF loans that Fernando Henrique Cardoso had taken out. And in 2005, he paid back all of the loans. Him and Nestor Kirchner announced on the same day that they were paying back all their loans to the IMF. And the next day, the IMF had to lay off around 2,000 people because they were making so much money off of these loans.
Right.
Okay. So at that point, he swung to the left farther, because with the conditionality agreements over, he was able to drastically increase social spending. So he increased money for the education and health systems. He created an affirmative action system that's based on social class more than race, which has quadrupled the number of black students in federal universities. And he doubled the number of students in free public national universities, while quadrupling the minimum salary. So he did a lot of things. He wasn't like a Obama-style character at all.
Right.
He was solidly social democrat, but not radical left. They maintained some neoliberal policies macroeconomically, like a floating exchange rate and an independent central bank that pleased the people up in the north. And this is why at the time you had The Economist praising Lula and Obama and people like that, because they considered Brazil to be and Argentina to be positive examples as alternatives to Hugo Chavez in Venezuela for other Latin American nations to follow. They were really trying to isolate Chavez. So the minute Chavez died, it looks like they just turned on all of the center-left governments in Latin America, and you have this rolling back of the pink tide that Mark Weisbrot is talking about this last week on Real News, about how all of the center-left and left governments in Latin America are being forced out of office with U.S. collaboration.
So that's an interesting thing. Yeah, we'll get to that in a second, and car wash. But yeah, so that there was a truth, obviously, that, as an example, Lula and Chavez followed very different politics, and there was a social democratic and a more, I don't know how you define Chavez. I mean, I'm still confused as to how to define Chavez's politics, to be honest. But there were different politics at stake. The United States was trying to pivot them against each other, but inside the region, it seemed like all of these governments, I mean, they weren't, I mean, Lula wasn't trying to be in conflict with Chavez, at least not, overtly. I mean, it seemed that they all had a sort of acceptance that we're all sort of were doing. I mean, I just read an excerpt from Castro's, a recent Castro autobiography, which is sort of just spoken word interviews with an interviewer. And he praised Lula. And he said, obviously Lula's on a totally different path than us, but, he's cutting poverty. He's combating racism in Brazil. He's bringing healthcare to people. Like, this is part of our same mission. And it seemed that those governments were actually able to recognize their alliance themselves in spite of that sort of attempt to pit.
Yeah, you're exactly right. Yeah. You're exactly right. The attempt to pit, to hold up Argentina and Brazil as a positive example to Chavez did not work in Latin America. All of the left Latin American governments formed alliances together. They met, they talked a lot together. And it comes down to this concept from Gramsci, who was a big influence on the PT party, which is the idea that the left, if the left is going to take power in a capitalist system and through a democracy, it has to build counter-hegemony. And so Lula felt like he was an ally to Venezuela and Cuba in the sense that there was a big effort underway in Latin America to create a counter-hegemony to American hegemony, to show that you didn't have to follow the Washington consensus to build society in Latin America. And this was a thorn in the side of the United States, obviously.
Very much so, and including in its more, sort of herbivorous varieties. Every time I talk about Brazil, I'll get, I'll I do get a lot of appreciation from people in Brazil who follow this type of media in the United States and appreciate it. But there's always, whether it's on Twitter or elsewhere, usually the sort of, oh, you don't know what you're talking about. Lula and PT were were both massively corrupt and so on. And it did seem that there was this car wash investigation that started, and this sort of free-floating corruption rhetoric starting, if I'm correct, in about 2014. Dilma Rousseff is Lula's successor. She's actually a really fascinating and in many ways impressive figure in her own right, but not as politically adroit as him, and maybe and was dealing with a totally different global economy. And then, this thing called car wash comes along. So what is car wash? And again, with some, let's also have objectivity here. I mean, did it implicate members of the Workers' Party? Like, what are the actual charges and the specifics, and what did it reveal? And in fact, as you alluded to before, what was the U.S. role?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked this question. It all starts basically, you can go back to 2002, 2003 with Otto Reich, the Cold Warrior, Cuban American, talking about corruption being the new enemy in Latin America in general. But really, it starts in 2009. In 2009, Hillary Clinton appeared on C-SPAN and said, democracy in Latin America is not enough. The United States has to work to strengthen independent judiciaries in Latin America. That year, according to cables that were leaked through WikiLeaks, there was a conference in Brazil called Bridge to the Future, in which Judge Sergio Moro was a key speaker, in which U.S. Department of Justice officials and Brazilian judiciary talked about setting up partnerships to combat corruption in Brazil. And they suggested in these leaked documents that Curitiba would be the city where this could happen. Okay, during the years that followed, it was uncovered by Snowden that the NSA was spying on the Brazilian petroleum company Petrobras.
Right.
And around 2014, as you said, this investigation started up called Operation Car Wash, which is a joint investigation between the U.S. Department of Justice, the FBI, the SEC, and the Brazilian Public Prosecutor's Office and federal police. But what's funny about it is it's a small branch of the prosecutor's office and the judiciary based in Curitiba, led by this judge named Sergio Moro. Okay, so they uncovered a lot of corruption, which is not hard to do, in the private sector, especially in the petroleum and the construction industries, which are two of the 5 most corrupt industries in the world.
Right.
I'm from Chicago, where you don't even have a bidding process for public construction projects. And, if you scratch under the surface in construction in Chicago, you're going to find all kinds of corruption going on, right? So it's not that this corruption isn't happening, but they failed to, they've uncovered all kinds of things like on audio tapes and videotapes of top officials from other political parties receiving bribes. And in one case, 2014 presidential candidate Aécio Neves threatening to kill a witness.
Right.
These guys are all free. But they managed to find one person talking about this apartment that Lula allegedly received reforms on. And this is how the case was built against Lula. What's interesting about it is that in 2009, the U.S. Department of Justice set up a case against Senator Ted Stevens in Alaska, alleging that he had received illegal reforms from an oil company on his house. Mm-hmm. And this caused him to lose the re-election. And then the Department of Justice the entire case was reversed, and members of the DOJ were accused of prosecutorial misconduct for violating Brady law. In other words, hiding evidence that's beneficial to the defense. Mm-hmm. Of relying entirely on plea bargain testimony by unreliable witnesses, et cetera, et cetera. the case against Lula is very similar to the Ted Stevens case. That in this case, they weren't even able to prove that he ever owned or set foot in this apartment. Then after he was arrested, a squatters movement led by presidential candidate Guilherme Boulos invaded the apartment and filmed and showed that no reforms had ever taken place there. You know, like, so.
And also, I just want to really underline that this case hinges on the notion that he took this seaside apartment, which, by the way, I mean, I guess, you know, not that this is a very second order point, but it's not like this is a middle class apartment. This is not like some type of ostentatious, you know, ultra exclusive sea villa. This is something totally, you know, I mean, it's, you know, it's Brazil, it's beautiful, it's by the beach, but it's, you know, it's a high rise building of, you know, economy apartments. There's nothing luxury or high end about it. And there's nothing from at least the visible physical evidence to even sort of implicate anybody even ever living or spending time there. Now, I guess theoretically, I mean, you could still own a place and not set foot in it and expect to use it in the future or whatever. But this of an investigation that has exposed, I believe, you mentioned several examples. I believe there's also an example of Michel Temer, the president who the impeachment of Dilma, you know, took her position of him on tape talking about bribing people. It has exposed a massive amount of misconduct. Most of the most extreme examples of which have come from the political right and from the private sector. And somehow the most tenuous example has jailed the most popular and successful politician in the country's history.
Yeah, it's a farce. It's a judicial farce. And that's not just my opinion. That's what Jeffrey Robertson, Queen's Counsel and human rights lawyer from the UN, says about this case, which is why it's under review from the UN Human Rights Committee. But just to, your point about the apartment is absolutely correct. It's not a very fancy apartment. On top of that, they were unable to prove he ever owned or set foot in it. But even if he had, the dates that they say he received this apartment were after he left office. So what if someone gave him an apartment after he was president? There's no way to prove that there was any conflict of interest because he was retired.
Right.
You know, but in any event, there's no proof that he received it, which is why his official sentence, his official charges are for committing undetermined acts. They couldn't even specify what he did in the sentence, which is what makes it such a farce, really.
He's literally in jail for what they're deeming undetermined acts.
Yes.
They related to
not related to anything, because this is there's all this misinformation in the New York Times and the Guardian and these fake liberal publications up in the north. If you can't determine the act, you can't relate it to anything.
Precisely. Right.
You can't even say what it was. So how could you relate it to anything?
Right. And if you read any coverage of him, they will literally write he's in jail for sometimes they'll just outright say corruption, which is mind-blowing. And then other times they'll say indeterminate acts related to car wash, which is, you know, indeterminate acts related to ordering dinner. It doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, exactly. Well, day that the week that Lula was arrested, The Guardian ran an article saying that he was being arrested for allegedly receiving bribes as part of an 88 million real influence peddling deal with Petrobras Petroleum Company. In the actual sentence, Judge Moro says there's no relationship whatsoever with Petrobras. So my feeling is that these journalists who are writing about Lula's arrest and conviction have not read the actual sentence.
Right.
And it's a 200 and whatever page sentence in archaic legal Portuguese, but they haven't read it. So they're just repeating what they see in these right-wing media oligarchies down here. Nobody's doing the actual job of reporting and trying to figure out if what the prosecution is saying is correct or not.
And also, right, and just to really put a pin in this, and the Supreme Court jailed him before his appeal process has gone through. He still has appeals should he choose to pursue them. He's pursued some. I think he's stopped a certain appeal for technical reasons related to his candidacy for president. But that's what they jailed him on. He's the leading presidential candidate in an October election. The second candidate behind him is an overt fascist, and he has been jailed before his appeals have run out and completely excommunicated from public life based on exactly the case that Brian just outlined. And that is why people call this a judicial coup, and that's why there's such important implications of it. Briefly, can you explain, though, the sort of dramatic arc of 2016? What was the impeachment process of Dilma? Because Dilma has said explicitly that this is a two-step, that the right wing had lost 4 elections in a row to PT, first under Lula, then under her. And they decided, we're going to get rid of her. We're going to implement an austerity regime, which obviously the United States will be happy with. And then the next step is making sure Lula can't run again because, again, he's the most popular politician in the country. So we've actually, I think, explained Lula pretty well in the current situation, but what was the situation with Dilma? Because that in some ways is even, I mean, it would be like, I don't know, impeaching Obama for an accounting error or something. I mean, maybe explain that.
Yeah. Well, basically, when Dilma won the election, the re-election in 2014, there was a massive narrative shift in the northern media trying to portray Brazil as like a losing country. Right. And so after she won the election in 2014, this same Operation Car Wash team began to sabotage the economy. They froze all of the operations. They paralyzed operations of the 5 biggest construction companies in Brazil, causing 500,000 immediate job layoffs in 2015. And there's an article that ran in BBC down here that said that these maneuvers caused 2.7% of the 3.4% drop in GDP in 2015. So the economy was destabilized. Then the media started reporting all of these allegations that Dilma was involved in corruption with the Petrobras state petroleum company. I mean, I even saw John Oliver, talking about it, not knowing what he's talking about. So there was no evidence whatsoever that she was connected to any kind of corruption in Petrobras. None. That was never even brought onto the table. She was never accused of that, even though her name was associated with this in the New York Times, something like in 20 articles the year before the coup, right? So she was finally put up on impeachment for committing a budgetary infraction, which is not an impeachable offense in Brazil, called fiscal peddling. This is an infraction that's commonly used by all the mayors and the governors that just involves shifting values around in different ministries of your government to appear that one department isn't in the red or in the black, right. And it's often done before elections and whatever. The key point here, though, is that she was exonerated from these charges after the impeachment happened. And the week after the impeachment, the Senate legalized fiscal peddling. It's not even a crime anymore.
Right.
And then evidence came out that Eduardo Cunha and Temer were paying congressmen to vote in favor of the impeachment.
Right.
And so I find it ironic that newspapers like The Guardian and New York Times and Washington Post still, when they refer to this process, say the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff, which some people refer to as a coup. Because if she was thrown out of office for something that's not legal justification for impeachment, then it was a coup. I mean, it was illegal. The process was illegal. And if you look at the havoc that her successors have wreaked on Brazilian society, where Brazil's returning to the UN's World Hunger Map, extreme poverty has doubled in the last 2 years, crimes going through the roof, unemployment's going through the roof. You see, it was brutal. The effects of it, it's not that some people in Brazil are calling this a coup. It's unanimous on the left that this was a coup. Some people are calling it a form of warfare. This is a kind of low-intensity war against Brazil.
Yeah. No, that's certainly how I view it. Is there more momentum now? I mean, there was a whole other drama, which maybe we'll get into in another conversation, which, also underlined just the farcical nature of this. I mean, the deadly serious and horrifying nature of this, but the farcical nature of one lower level judge, one judge ordering Lula to be released, Judge Morrow refusing to comply with the order, thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people flooding on the streets expecting Lula's release, that being overturned. One part of me, and I'll just set the table for this last question, is very, I mean, legally it seems incredibly a pessimistic situation, because obviously the courts are, highly complicit in this process, and they've obviously, the jailing and silencing of Lula speaks for itself, and it's, and their role in this process. On the other hand, it seems, the left is converging. Lula is still the most important and leading presidential candidate, and maybe there's a chance here. I mean, what's your kind of read on the situation heading into October?
Well, if there are free elections, first of all, they're not free elections if Lula's not allowed to run. Right. That's a fact. Right. Even so, if they don't invent a way to just cancel the PT's candidacy entirely, I think that, for example, right now, Lula's popularity is higher than all other candidates combined.
Right.
There's some states like Bahia where he's got 82% support. So if the elections actually happen, the PT, with or without Lula, is going to win. There's no doubt about that. The question is, will they happen properly or not? And this is a big worry. I published a book of interviews last year called Voices of the Brazilian Left, and a lot of the people from the social movements and unions I spoke to are really worried that they're going to invent a reason to cancel the elections. To just say this time around the Senate will appoint the president, so this all depends on the pressure on the street, and there's a lot of big protests underway. If enough pressure can build up, if the unions start striking, there's going to be a national day of paralyzation on August 10th, which is tomorrow, actually. Yes. And tomorrow, a protest process is going to start across the nation for 5 days, culminating in Brasilia, when tens of thousands of people are going to surround the Supreme Electoral Court and demand that they allow Lula to register his candidacy. So a lot of the success of the left, which is united now in taking back power and undoing the damage caused by the coup, depends on people on the street. So I personally hope that it happens.
And I guess even potentially in an optimistic scenario, if this victory is achieved and, there is a PT government, that same momentum and harnessing of street energy could also change the character, and because even just for practical reasons, a more leftward government this time around to take on things like those media monopolies and other, structural oligarchies and police violence and so on, because not only because it's the right thing to do, but because obviously they pose a structural threat to even successful social democracy that's praised by The Economist.
Yeah, well, I hope so. If Lula's elected, he's going to be farther left this time around, right, because they're doing it without conservative coalition partners. This time, if he's not elected and Haddad is elected, I have a feeling they might try and placate the right a little bit. It might be a little bit more of a moderate government, but still undoing the privatizations of Petrobras and undoing the constitutional amendment freezing at health and education spending. But my hope is that Lula's allowed to run and he wins.
That's certainly my hope as well. Brian Mier, I really appreciate your time. Everybody should read Brasil Wire for the best, some of the best independent reporting, analysis, and insight from Brazil, the Brazilian left. And Brian, sure I'll be talking with you again sometime soon. I appreciate your time.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. All right, folks. I think the parallels there are actually very clear with the United States in a lot of ways. Including, I actually was just watching a Vice documentary on the rise of these really reactionary and evangelical movements and how they're sort of overlapping with this resurgent fascist right in Brazil and trying to capitalize on the attempted destruction of the left.
It's amazing how all this stuff is, it seems to be globally synchronized. Ira Katznelson wrote a book called Fear Itself about this sort of thing coalescing, sort of authoritarianism coalescing in the 20s and 30s and 40s. And we're just, it is like a global sort of virus almost.
Yeah. Well, right-wing authoritarianism is the herpes of capitalism, the really vivid, disgusting, but absolutely perfect phrase by Bill Fletcher Jr. Brendan, what were you going to say?
It's globalist.
It's globalist. I mean, I do think that somebody like, it's, if you got a President Lula back into office in Brazil, just even first and foremost, obviously stopping the emergency and the warfare on the Brazilian people. But I do think that social movement, none of this can happen without mass mobilization and social movements. But at the same time, there's, leaders also matter. And if you think about a world where it's an uphill struggle, but you have, wait a second, maybe in a couple of years, instead of a Bolsonaro, who's a fascist, being president of Brazil, or some horrible technocrat mediocrity, Lula is back in office. And then Corbyn's in office. Sanders is in office. And AMLO's in office. I mean, not to idolize these people, or not to say there aren't conditions that need to support them in doing the right thing, but that's a much more formidable, much more positive. I mean, if you can't see the massive difference there, I don't know what to tell you.
And I think part of the reason is the right sees a massive difference there, and that's why they're doing all this thing.
And that's why that's the point to really underline with Lula is that, I mean, we see it in the United States. The United States, the right goes out of its way to destroy even conservative, corporate-friendly Democrats. In Brazil, you had a president who, partially because of very favorable global conditions, literally that would be the equivalent of and obviously Brazil starts with way more poverty, way more complexity and so on. But that was Scandinavia and Brazil to the extent it could happen. He produced a successful social democracy that in no way, in fact, the traditional elites got richer and they're still doing this, which says a lot about the need, not just morally, but practically, to reclaim structural power, because they won't even allow that. And that, in some ways, is why I am not, I'm not into the minutia of this stuff, but one of the reasons I'm not just a social democrat, and I'm much more serious about putting much larger amounts of the economy and democratizing them, putting them under government control, is because I see that even a situation like that was in fact a pure win-win, they're still not happy with.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak for Jamie here. I think there is an inevitable psychopathy or sociopathy of capitalism.
Yes. Yeah, she's totally right about that. All right, folks. Obviously, become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. Click on the support page of the majority.fm homepage. That's how this show happens. That's how we stay independent. It's a cliche to mention it, but I mean, honestly, where else are you going to get that kind of conversation?
You want to give it to the Washington Post, who just let Palmer Luckey write an op-ed? Did you see this?
No.
Palmer Luckey wrote an op-ed saying, "Hey, if tech wants to protect Americans or something like that, they should stop. They should work better with the military."
Right.
Palmer Luckey, the guy who created Oculus, but was kicked off of that project after it was outed that he was basically a sponsor for 4chan MAGA fascists.
# resistance.
Democracy dies in the darkness.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want the New York Times or the Washington Post to collapse, but if you think that your subscription to those sites are doing any type, I mean, they need to be there. They're a vital part of the ecosystem. But if you think editorially and big picture they're doing anything to rein in, even frankly, Trump, let alone the excesses and the context that give rise to Trump, you're delusional. you do need to look at this program and others like it. We're doing that work.
Yeah, independent or local. I don't think you
Period.
should subscribe to. I don't think you should give money to those papers. I think they'll be fine.
I think they'll be totally fine. I agree with you entirely. Independent or local, and of course, Majority Report, big part of that. We appreciate all your support. The Michael Brooks Show is an emerging part of that, and we appreciate your support. This Sunday for patrons, Gene Bajalan and I untangled the Jeremy Corbyn anti-Semitism and the Labor Party story, and went into, again, also some of the kind of synchronized global implications of that. That was for patrons. Of course, Woke Bros with Waz for patrons. And each Tuesday we do a full, segmented, really, really good show that's global. It's entertaining. There's a lot going on. Next Tuesday, this coming Tuesday, there's going to be a substitute super producer. So pretty exciting show coming up there. And then, of course, we have our new, thank you, the first, we've already cracked 5K on our new YouTube channel.
It's
crushing it. Get to the Michael Brooks Show YouTube channel. Similar, I think, obviously, between that, Majority Report, Antifa, Literary Hangover, and any number of other great, independent voices. You got a great diet there. That YouTube page, more global, more IDW, also longer form in some cases, philosophy. There's a lot going on there. Check it out. Patreon.com/TMBS. Matt.
Yeah, patreon.com/literary hangover. We're in Hawthorne right now. We're going to get to some women authors. I didn't intend it to be sort of Hawthorne and Washington Irving heavy, but that's because I'm actually working extra hard on the Catherine Maria Sedgwick and Lydia Maria Child episode. So I'm not just a bro. This isn't just bro literature, okay? But yeah, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Maypole of Marymount, I think it has a pretty astounding amount of parallels to our modern globalist cuck versus MAGA ethno-state fascist dynamic. So check it out. And we go through the entire story, so you don't even have to read it.
Oh, that's great. I really enjoyed because I do read novels, but not enough, and I've enjoyed when I've had an opportunity.
Is the Marlon James one the last one you read?
Marlon James one is the last one I read, unfortunately. Brief History of 7 Killings. I'm reading Sacred Games right now, but I did read that when that came out. Yeah, I think I said it before, but there was something just so fitting about taking the train through New England, just listening to Hawthorne, even down to like Bowdoin as a historical place. And like going to Bates, and I remember all of these places. Like there's like literally like wicker chairs with like Hawthorne Hall. It's like
there's in the early episode of The Sopranos when Tony takes Meadow up to check out Bowdoin.
Colby College.
She goes to all three.
Yeah,
she does the tour. That's the Bates, Colby Bates Bowdoin tour.
Yep, they show a Hawthorne quote in there.
Right. Yeah.
Great episode.
That is a really good episode. Of course, check out Antifada, Patreon. What is that? Patreon.com
/The Antifada. Chrisman and Virgil Texason.
Chrisman and Virgil Texason. Lots going on, of course, in the whole MR universe. Brendan is hard at work on a Fish Sucks Patreon project.
No, but I'll plug something.
Yeah, please do.
My friend, former professor of mine, Greg Ames, if we want to talk about bro literature, recently had one of his stories read at SF Sketchfest by Lance Reddick of Corporate. It's called Benefactor. It's on Selected Shorts podcast.
Oh, nice.
And he's interviewed by Arpana Nancharla as well. And it's pretty funny, so I would check it out.
Aparna. That's a cool. I hosted a show once where she was a co-panelist on, and hoo boy, that was a tough one. I felt very Samish. All right, everybody. We'll see you in the fun half. Welcome back to the fun half, everybody. I think I called in. Let me just see.
That's the new ringtone.
I like that, actually. That's pretty cool.
Imagine if making phone calls was that musical.
I would make more. I make very few phone calls. It's weird.
Yeah, don't call me. Just send a text.
Oh, you can call me, but I'm not giving out my number. My friends can call me.
To anybody.
Making phone calls easier.
That is what I've noticed is like, what's weird is that for, like, I have a handful of people that live all over the place that I do like to actually have phone conversations with. Although even when I love talking to somebody on the phone, talking on the phone is just exhausting. But like catching up with somebody and being like, hey, how you doing, is better over text. Making plans, better to call.
Exactly.
Because texts are they just go on forever. No one has any frigging clue what they're doing.
This is why you don't make plans with people.
Okay, well, look,
Matt,
if you're just like turning this into like a broader
Thomas Merton over
right,
here.
like that's just like Matt's just like, this is why you just. It's very lucky. I will say though, I think your solitary tendencies and I'm not as far as you, but I occasionally have some pretty solitary tendencies too, is very supported by generally liking your work and the people you work with. If you didn't have that, if you needed like I can't stand who I was around all day and what I did sucked, you would absolutely need a much bigger social pressure valve.
Maybe.
Or maybe not, but I would assume so.
I got some pressure valves.
Well, the best pressure valves actually do involve some coordination. So, proving my original point.
Yeah, no, I'm just being difficult.
Which is like, it's better to say, I'll see you at 9 for those drinks versus coordinating forever with her over text.
Yeah, when was the last time you made plans in one text?
Never.
Exactly.
My strategy is to let the group text sort of fill up so everyone else decides what they want.
No, you can do
and
it
if it doesn't work for me, then I don't go.
I'm talking on one-on-one text now. Group text, absolutely. Group texts are beautiful.
Mute all group texts.
I mute all texts. I don't, because I don't like notifications on my phone. I mute as much as possible because I check my phone enough anyways. I'm addicted to the fucking thing. It's not like I'll miss a text. It just means that I won't have an annoying notification popping up.
I like text because I can get to them when I want to get to them.
Sure, but yeah, even more so if you don't even get notifications, which is part of my technique. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, AOC, she did a good job on Chris Cuomo on CNN last night, and I want to say like. I think like she should take a week to chill. Like everybody needs breaks at some time, and she's putting like she's getting an enormous amount done for us, and I just want to encourage everybody to like also take care of themselves. And I also think that like this is a segment where she nailed it, and I also see a lot of concern trolling of segments where maybe she didn't nail it quite as much.
Let her cook.
Let her cook. No one's a messiah. No one's perfect. If she says something that's genuinely substantively wrong, we can, respond in an appropriate but chill way.
But stop acting like it reflects upon the project as a whole.
Precisely. And also let this be a reminder to you that her win, her presence on the national stage is a massively positive thing. This is AOC last night, Chris Cuomo and CNN.
all, the thing that we need to realize is people talk about the sticker shock of Medicare for all. They do not talk about the sticker shock of the cost of our existing system. You know, in a Koch brothers funded study, if any study is going to try to be a little bit slanted, it would be one funded by the Koch brothers. It shows that Medicare for all is actually much cheaper than the current system that we pay right now. And let's not forget that the reason that the Supreme Court upheld the Affordable Care Act is because they ruled that each of these monthly payments that everyday Americans make is a tax. And so while it may not seem like we pay that tax on April 15th, we pay it every single month, or we do pay a tax season if we don't buy, these plans off of the exchange. So we're paying for this system. We Americans have the sticker shock of healthcare as it is. And what we're also not talking about is why aren't we incorporating the cost of all the funeral expenses of those who die because they can't afford access to healthcare? That is part of the cost of our system. Why don't we talk about the cost of reduced productivity because of people who need to go on disability, because of people who are not able to participate in our economy, because they're having issues like diabetes or they don't have access to the health care that they need. I think at the end of the day, we see that this is not a pipe dream. Every other developed nation in the world does this. Why can't America? And that is the question that we need to ask. We have done these things before. We write unlimited blank checks for war. We just wrote a $2 trillion check for that tax cut, the GOP tax cut, and nobody asked those folks how are they going to pay for it. So my question is, why is it that our pockets are only empty when it comes to education and health care for our kids? Why are our pockets only empty when we talk about 100% renewable energy that is going to save this planet and allow our children to thrive? We only have empty pockets when it comes to the morally right things to do. But when it comes to tax cuts for billionaires and when it comes to unlimited war, we seem to be able to invent that money very easily. And to me, it belies a lack of moral priorities that people have right now, especially the Republican Party.
She's 100% right. That's a perfect fusion of moral, ethical, strategic argumentation. No person in their right mind would dispute it. And the only thing I have to add to that is I love Chris Cuomo's mind-blown face.
Yeah.
I love his just like, fuck. Like, I asked her about the numbers, and she just was like, whoa, like fucking war and tax cuts. Like, I almost felt like Chris Cuomo, like a Crosby, Steele, Nash and Young song was starting to go off in his head, because he went from like mind-blown to kind of like, maybe this fucking chick is right. Like, maybe things are wrong, man. Like, maybe I remember my Jesuit education, and it's wrong to just fund bombing people across the world when we can't give people health care.
I'm trying to think of
his conscience might have been a bit.
He went into just read-only mode. Like, I'm trying to think of some sort of metaphor here, and the way he didn't say a single thing in that entire clip. It's like if you know how you're going in a jump rope, right? And you're trying to get the rhythm so you can jump in. Yeah. It was like he started to look for that, but the ropes just started going too fast. His eyes just glazed over. That was an amazing tear to go on CNN.
It was beautiful.
Like, and he couldn't figure out how to get a word in.
Well, because there was no bullshit. Like, it wasn't a whole, and it was, by the way, it was no bullshit actually, because she started, and Brendan pointed this out this morning. You're totally right. She started from the moral foundation. If you go to that lower level plane and you do a pedant, and it isn't unimportant, but the cost is second order, to say the least. And if you go and you go, oh, well, actually we'll save money like this and blah, blah, blah. You're off to the races in their game of pedantry and numbers and all of that. The foundation is it's an absolute moral necessity that every single human being have full health care in this country, in the world, frankly. And that let's tack on to that. We are not facing a situation. There are some places where it's like literally because of structural economic conditions, the money ain't there. What are we going to do with what little we have? That is not the case in the United States, even remotely. And it's exemplified every single day by the fact that we can have military missions on simultaneous continents. We can get involved in endless foreign conflicts. And, of course, we can endlessly give money away to functionally, I'm not even making a moral judgment, functionally, in terms of contribution, some of the most useless sectors and people in this country. But that's it. And look, if you want to be, I mean, Chris Cuomo obviously is, you know, he's not supposed to go into sort of a contra mode. But if like there was somebody else on that split screen, if it was a triple screen and some right wingers there, like, good luck being like shouting in the corner, like, oh, it's a pipe dream. The numbers will never add up. Like, good luck either being like the numbers nerd, or if you really want to, you want to actually go out there and say what the Koch brothers really think, which is like, you should die and starve and suffer unless you're ultra wealthy. Good luck. Go for it.
Ben Shapiro officially challenged AOC like she has time running for Congress.
Yeah, AOC
to
doesn't
boost his profile.
Yeah, she doesn't have time to give you some numbers juice, you little prick. And that's also a perfect example. Look, if you get, maybe he will warp her and get her onto his like weird little chessboard that doesn't matter. And inside the confines of a debate that doesn't matter, that has no stakes in real people's lives, that is all just fucking baseball card collecting, he can win by any moral, policy, strategy, metric that took the world into account. AOC would fucking own Ben Shapiro with morals and ethics, facts and logic, poise and style, and voice.
Just general likability.
And general likability. And general superior humanhood. Please. And no, but that would be Ben Shapiro. He'd be in this person like, this is a really nice story, but my wife's a doctor. It's all nonsense. It doesn't matter. Just because somebody can like string together a sort of logically seeming progression and attach numbers to it does not mean that they're making a coherent argument. And by the way, look more for coherence than logic. Logic is part of coherence, okay? Like, logic in and of itself could quite lead... I mean, you could logically argue anything. It's not an innate value. Brendan, what?
No, I'm just thinking about people whose intellectual inquiry ends at logic and stupid.
Why they suck.
Well, it's also like... Ben Shapiro, with this reputation of facts and logic, is just fucking ludicrous. Have the guy talk about climate change. Look at the Daily Wire talk about climate change. The top article is like, years ago they were worried about global cooling. Like, he's a fucking idiot, but he talks fast. And
right.
Yeah, and he's better at staying in the lines of, he's not perfect, but like keeping a plausible deniability about certain things that really, the real things that appeal to his audience.
Right. Like, Palestinians like to live in sewers and bomb stuff. He doesn't say stuff like that. Oh, wait.
Wouldn't you love to be in the room for the conversation where Sam Harris is like, Ben, why did you say that? You can't say those things explicitly.
What you have to do is indirectly imply that they should all be nuked, but say that it's speculative and then say it would be terrible, but maybe it should happen. What you have to do is say 5 different things at once and have plausible deniability to the point of saying absolutely nothing.
You need to find a bit of scripture that you can misinterpret and then uphold, and then you have justification.
And then you have justification for a thought experiment, which could indirectly give interference towards stacking people into naked pyramids in Guantanamo. But the point is that actually what's happening in Guantanamo is the last thing that you want to be talking about when you're talking about torture. And I would recommend, like, what AOC should definitely not debate Ben Shapiro.
Absolutely not.
Waste of everybody's time except for his.
Yeah, if Shapiro wants, like, I don't know, some middling DSA person, sure, but like AOC's got big fish to fry, buddy.
Yeah,
you've got another year or two until you're completely toxic, which is already happening.
Exactly.
What was it, Rappaport or who was it that
Michael Rappaport had like a reversal?
Said one tweet and then like after 30 minutes, like actually this pig is disgusting.
Yeah, actually, that guy's an asshole. Fuck that guy.
Ben Shapiro's toxic. The IDW's toxic. They don't have long. Yeah.
Just the only thing that's important about them in the next couple of months is going to be my book. And then the other thing is yeah, I mean, and also like, and if you do debate Ben Shapiro, ask him about his name in that Canadian guy's Twitter searches. Yes. That's what I'm curious about.
Climate change and incel terrorism.
Precisely. I think that guy was actually anti-Muslim terrorism, but I'm sure it could be just as easily. It's pathetic. And also, and frankly, look, I won't reduce this to like a plug for us, but also like if AOC is going to start playing in like the YouTube alternative media environment, then it's really important that this new crop of politicians and shows like this and, you know, everywhere else. I know she's done TYT, but like, and that's great. She needs to keep, you know, building and supporting those bridges, and actually building an
Gramscian hegemony.
Yeah, exactly. Precisely building those ecosystems versus having some like one-off feud with some person who should really just have been a novelty act of the Bush era, but because we live in a really fucked up place, is somehow still known. Speaking of living in a fucked up place where somehow some people are still known, Candace Owens was on Ari Melber's show with Michael Eric Dyson. Wow. This is not a thrilling segment. No, I'm just kidding. This is actually a very illustrative segment. It's an indictment, though. I mean, why can't Ari Melber moderate a debate between Cornel West and Michael Eric Dyson that actually reflected actual intellectual splits inside the African-American community or the left, instead of jumping on the bandwagon of pretending that Candace Owens is anything other than the new flavor of the month, sort of, you know, far-right nonsense.
Yeah, you've already lost when you give her this platform.
Yeah, you've already, yeah.
She's a joke.
She is a joke, and here she is being a joke on MSNBC with Ari Melber and Michael Eric Dyson.
You guys can try to pretend that he is pushing in a racist era in this country when, in fact, we know the Democrats are the racists, have always been the racists. The party's never switched, and you should know this as a civil rights person. You know the history. You know the people under the hood of the KKK.
Let me respond.
Were
Candace,
Democrats, and the party never switched. And
Candace, I'm going to give the professor a chance to respond.
You should defend what happened to me yesterday and defend our community being attacked.
And watch this filibuster, folks.
Because we support Donald Trump, because we understand that we have better economic opportunities under him than we ever had in Obama. And shame on you for spreading in Obama.
Candace, I'm going to give the professor a chance to respond.
Under his administration, he allowed the bloodshed, and Trump wanted to send the National Guard, and the Democrats stopped him. I'm really done with this. I'm done with this racist narrative.
I don't want to have to talk over people, but we have to go back and forth.
That's actually
you guys can try to pretend.
Wow, she's filibustering us now. That's actually a great tactic if you have absolutely no idea what you're talking about and you're just a far-right wind-up doll.
Yeah.
Because that just will get clipped up and distributed by the Turning Points and all these other extremist outfits to say she owned them by repeating talking points that are ancient. I mean, literally, this talking point comes from the line from before any of us are even born, of people on the right who decided that they wanted to pretend that the Republican Party was not the home of racism. And actually, to answer her question specifically, there was a time where it switched. And that it switched happened was in the mid-1960s. When a guy named Lyndon Baines Johnson, who honestly I'm not even sure if Candace Owens is familiar with, signed a thing called the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act and a whole other set of legislation to at least formally end legal segregation and apartheid in this country, which existed for essentially since the Civil War, which ended slavery. Again, facts don't care about your 2-minute propaganda videos. And when he signed that legislation, he predicted that the South would be lost for a generation. In fact, it's been more than generations. And the reason he predicted that was because there were these things called the Dixiecrats, and they were, yes, Democrats at the time. And then what happened was they switched because the Democratic Party voted to support civil rights, and then they joined the Republican Party, which has supported everything from dog whistle politics to a war on the poor and people of color in this country, and now in today's age literally has actual Nazis winning open primaries in places like Illinois.
The idea that the Dixiecrats just decided to like what exactly was the process the Dixiecrats underwent? What, they put on invisibility cloaks or something? What exactly happened to them?
They then were like phase 2 Obama.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so hilarious and revealing that in the midst of her little tantrum there, she says, and they didn't switch, because it shows that she knows exactly what we're talking about. She knows exactly what happened, and she earns a paycheck because she's willing to deny that. That's the only reason she's there. Like, there's no talent behind Candace Owens.
There's nothing. And I think that, and that again, like, that does underline how easy right-wing politics and right-wing media is, because it's a fusion of endless amounts of money, totally craven, amoral personalities, and a public that has very little historical awareness. And that's an ecosystem that fits everybody, from Foster Freeze to Sam Harris, to Candace Owens, to Charlie Kirk, because there are people who maybe just, their public school was starved of funding, or they were kept out of a public school so they didn't learn anything, and they think that there was Lincoln, and Lincoln was essentially the Donald Trump of his day, and he freed slaves because he was doing a great job. And then there was civil rights, which was sort of okay, but it was really mean to white people. But the good parts were supported by Republicans. And now today, black people are terrible, either because of rap music or genetics. And Candace Owens is a brave truth teller.
And MLK is in a truck ad.
Yeah, an MLK.
Bowl, so it's
right.
Cool.
So it's great. If anything, it's a little questionable because he might have alluded to race too much in that ad.
Also, keep squirt gunning Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens,
please,
and harassing them out of restaurants.
Yeah,
and don't do anything that makes them. Don't
do anything that
they can victimize, make them look like too much of a victim.
Nothing that can look sympathetic,
but humiliate them and harass them and make them feel unwelcome in public, because they're not welcome.
They're not. Comedic humiliation and general disrespect is the order of the day for all of these people. Bully the bullies. You're calling from a 908 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Is it up?
Talked about George. Hello.
Sorry, you got to start again, man. You were down. Sorry about that. Go ahead.
All right, it's good. So I noticed you guys hadn't talked about Jordan Peterson in a while.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when I really want to raise my blood pressure, I go on his Twitter, because it's full of just his bullshit, like propaganda talking points.
Cool retweets.
And yeah, retweets who he claims, he's not endorsing them, but they all just happen to be like these right-wing, like PragerU and
just consider
all these other propaganda outlets.
Right.
Yeah, but he's not endorsing them. He's just retweeting only right-wingers for some reason. And recently he's gone on like an anti-climate change. A week ago, he retweeted PragerU, and he was like something for the anti-capitalist environmentalists to hate, and it was a link to a PragerU video about climate change. And then he was also trying to deny that the recent wildfires in California have anything to do with man-made climate change.
Okay. Can't prove it.
Yes.
Yeah. So do you want us to tee off on this, or did you have a point? I mean, other than the fact that, like, look, the dude is a far-right self-help shaman.
His original claim to fame was saying that trans people wanting their pronoun to specify their pronouns were like a Marxist plot. He's a fucking reactionary fascist,
he's a hysterical fool.
That's true.
I mean,
yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think that, look, I've said, and, you know, I think there's conditions on the ground, social, economic, so on, that sometimes these people, and I think maybe particularly Jordan Peterson, speak to, that if we dismiss or don't contend with, we're making a real mistake. And I don't just want to play culture war games with him. That being said, he's a far-right gender essentialist with insane conspiracy theories about how the world works. Like, he's a nutcase. I mean, what Matt just said is literally what he said. Like, that's not a comedic summary. That's fucking insane. And he lied. Yeah, and he, you know what? Again, I'll be super careful and generous about this. I don't know if he lied. Maybe he's so hysterical he didn't understand it. Right? Like, I don't know. But
that's
yes, his
point.
public presentation of the law, of that law, was wrong. It was not what was in the law. And he is quite, I mean, he's literally a hysteric. I mean, have you watched him speak? I mean,
oh yeah, he cries about, you know, how beautiful like minarchism is. And
well, look,
whatever.
Put it this way. Put it this way. On this show, and maybe honestly, maybe in a healthier culture, there would be more, you know, sort of room for people to, express more of their emotions publicly. Maybe, although I'm hesitant. But on this show, every single day, we deal with topics that are real, like actual things that are happening to human beings that are horrible. Emerging threats, like even just the conversation with happening in Brazil, from an imprisonment of a very good political leader to the destruction, to putting people back into hunger and poverty. It's disgusting. It's wrong. And you have never seen any of us have breakdowns like that. This guy is on YouTube sobbing about snowball fights. Okay? That's a
Wait, what?
Is
that an actual thing?
I don't even know. Maybe I'm conflating.
Yeah,
them,
he's saying that saying that his son not allowed to throw snowballs at school is, you know, making men into, like, I don't know.
But maybe he wasn't crying during that one. My point being is that the guy is a hysteric. Anyways, Brendan, what did you bring up?
I just wanted to bring up this map from his book in 1999, Maps of Meaning. This was a diagram he drew, and like this is. I don't want to, be ableist or anything, but like, if this is like a published academic, like a serious guy, you have to have some questions. I can't make heads or tails.
Well, it's funny because there's that famous example of some engineer or something putting something into a postmodern journal saying, and it was all made up, and saying, look, I get this published, and the right just loves to like use that as a cudgel against postmodernism. This is that. This should not have made it past peer review. It's fucking ludicrous.
Right. Or even, or as I always kind of try to say, is like splitting it. Like, I think Jungian ideas can be interesting. I think some of the things that he maybe says about self-help are fine. The guy should not be talking about politics. And in fact, the project of trying to naturalize Jungian thought in evolutionary biology is not only is it wrong, it's a dangerous mixing of two worlds, right? Like, if you were to say there's like an imaginative space that deals with subjective realities and might have insight about how we conduct and lead our lives, I actually agree with that. Then to turn around and say that actually there's this field of evolutionary biology, which not in like the proper scientific sense, but all of the people who try to do, books of like, well, the reason that we shop like this is because, apes back in the savannah were whatever. That's an interesting speculative exercise. That is not the same thing as like, the science of how like biosystems work. Right. So it's actually more speculative than people would suggest. And, he's trying to synchronize both of those things. He's trying to suggest that evolution in biology shows that essentialist categories are real, which has very damaging political and justified, exactly. And then that all of these like mythological tropes are encoded and confirmed by biology. And that is the political project of a far right, just like almost necessarily. And also, it's I'm trying to think of a diplomatic way to say it. It's very, very shaky.
Well, and it's like the thing where he's like with Jim Jeffries. Oh, my bad. I didn't think about that. Right. The thing is guess what?
Yeah, the civil rights. Oh, my fucking God. Yeah,
it was embarrassing.
And the thing is like there are people that commented on the video like, why are you guys going after this guy because he admitted he was wrong? Guess what? He doesn't admit he was wrong. He doesn't usually talk on platforms that will challenge him about that shit. And he says bullshit like that all the time. Reactionary, just far right crap that there aren't people to challenge him on because they don't care to. That's what the IDW is. It's a safety chamber for people who don't want to be challenged on specific conversations that the left likes to have.
Precisely. And also, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You've had the savvy and the ability, which Jordan Peterson undoubtedly does, to get yourself in a position where you're being called the most important intellectual in the world today. And a great degree of what you talk about is these hysterical theories and ideas you have about the left that sound like things that are from the John Birch Society in the 60s. And when somebody gets specific on something that should be the least controversial area of American life, like the idea that the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act are like correct and appropriate and necessary, should be sky is blue stuff. And you at first kind of imply that you don't agree with those things. And then when you're given a totally obvious example, you do change your position and get to the right place. But that's embarrassing and ridiculous. Like, you should, at the very least, speaking in, clean your room terms, you should have the humility to say, like, maybe I shouldn't be a global political pundit if I don't even know the basics of a ninth grade civics level understanding of how we established equal rights in the United States. Maybe you should just shut up about some things, okay? I'm willing to not talk about the intricacies of what dragons mean in people's dreamscape or whatever the fuck Jordan Peterson knows that I don't, okay?
Bill Maher wants you to fly out to LA to talk about that, actually. So.
Right, true. In which case I will do that. So I take that back.
Let me brush up quick.
I guess.
Yeah, I'm going to brush up on that. I guess that would be really funny to do the version of like, I guess you were right. Dragons do represent the penis. Might be.
New rule.
New rule. Okay. Michael Brooks is going to talk about dragons. He has to at least read a young intro book, okay?
The other thing you notice about Peterson is how he tells the left and leftists to, grow up. You're fighting God. You're not really mad at the system. You're mad at God. But then when you talk about the right and Trump supporters, like, well, maybe they're wrong, but what happens if you don't listen to them?
Then they'll get upset. Because, of course, you're mad at God, but they're mad at trannies. Yeah, that's great, Jordan. We're angry at a thing that is, actually I can't even keep going through this. The climate, at this point, it's still a major influence in culture. But, the game, Matt says, of all of these people, it's ridiculous. Like, they are what they are. Of course, he tweeted out climate change denial because he's a right-wing pundit. Yes.
Yeah, no, I was like one of these people though that at first, like when he first came on the stage, I didn't really watch that video with the trannies and shit, and I thought like for whatever reason I thought he was right about that law, so I thought, okay, maybe this guy like is somewhat arguing in good faith, but I realized kind of quickly that obviously he has a vested interest in being a right-wing moron. And
dude, let me just say this. A real easy rule of thumb is that any person, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that there are criticisms of campus and like there's a vital debate going on, and any person that has a good faith criticism is from the left. Any person not from the left harnessing those talking points is just either transphobic or far right or wants to introduce their own actual codes controlling speech on campuses.
Fascists know that, like, they see the left get away with us saying, like, hey, we should universalize healthcare and nationalize Facebook. And they think, well, if they can say that, I should be able to say my shit about the ethno-state. And there's two scenarios that will happen. One is they'll just continue, and Twitter will allow them to continue spreading racist propaganda, or they'll harm free speech for everyone, and the left will get taken down with them. It's a win-win for them. That's why this is why this is such a difficult area to be in.
It's difficult, but a good rule of thumb is to assume the opposite. This is another silly IDW trope, which they don't follow themselves, but assume the worst of intentions. Okay? Like, that's the reason I called Jordan Peterson early when I first saw him. I was like, I don't know anything about this bill, frankly, okay? And you know what? To be honest with you, yes. If there was literally a bill in Canada that said if you misgender somebody, you go to jail for 5 years, yeah, I'd oppose that, okay? Fair enough. But I said, there's a hysterical professor ranting about gender identity and campuses. I'm going to assume the worst about him. And that has been validated across the board. Yep.
Yeah, I've definitely learned that lesson over the past 2 years. I kind of used to be part of that whole, like, free speech absolutism crowd, but I don't know, all of this Trump fascist bullshit, Turning Point USA has really maybe changed my mind over the past year, I would say, year and a half.
It's definitely thrown into stark relief, and I think people like Sam Harris really don't like that. Like, if I was, like, think of how much better it'd be than if Hillary was president.
Oh, it'd be great. Because then he could just... Oh, yeah. Because, I mean, his whole bullshit double game and the hysteria, and by the way, there's this new data showing that actually the only people who ever actually do, in a functional sense, get punished for their speech on college campuses are massively disproportionately from the left. But like, what a shock, right? Of course, but I mean, look, yes, it's been thrown into stark relief, and I think that it's actually helpful because I think people like you, who are actually interested in these things and might, have some concerns about free speech and so on, which I think are I think are valid. You're seeing that this is a con and a shell game and a Trojan horse for fascism. And the rest of them are, being like, yeah, there's this new piece from Prager about why it's, climate change isn't real.
It's what we said earlier. Most people aren't in for that.
Yeah.
Like, Kanye might say some really troubling things about slavery. He's not going to be down with fucking hanging out with Charlie Kirk for a sustained amount of period of time.
Well, just on a, like,
true.
I could be hanging out.
Even
right.
Okay, in terms of personality and ideology, like, to the extent that it exists in Kanye, right? Like, the people don't naturally like this shit.
Right. I think that's true. I'm sorry, you had a final point to make, man?
Oh, no, yeah. I was just, like, going to preface this with, like, the main reason I called was just because, not any serious points, just that his Twitter is just, if you're ever in the mood to get mad, you should go on his Twitter.
I'm blocked.
Or laugh. All right, brother. Thanks for the call. Yeah. Appreciate it. Now, there is another group of people that is extremely concerned about the war on free speech, particularly in Canada, and the repression of Jordan Peterson, and that is, of course, the Saudi Arabia. The Saudi-owned Al Arabia, I believe it's a website, news website, has referenced, I don't know who the other dude is, Dennis Court. I don't know who that dude is, but Jordan Peterson has been identified by Al Arabia as a prisoner of conscience in Canada. Due to the recent diplomatic spat between the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the state of Canada, and the country, the nation state of Canada. I think that the Saudis have given Jordan Peterson an enormous compliment here, because clearly, to me, in this guy's kind of megalomania and fantasies, I think a part of him wants this. Like, I do think that Jordan Peterson on some level would love if one day he woke up and he was just like, I've got an appointment on YouTube at 9, and then I've got an interview with a Nazi TV station later where I'll talk about why when women stopped baking cookies, boys became gay. And then I'm going to count my 80 grand Patreon receipts, and then Sam Harris and I have a debate about truth claims. And then all of a sudden he's getting to it, and then boom, through the door, a sandal-wearing, pink-attired Justin Trudeau is standing there, flanked by 2 transgender security guards. And they say, "It's time to go to jail, Jordan. You've been triggering a lot of people around here, and we don't take it anymore in our new Maoist gay country," or whatever it would be called. And Jordan Peterson is taken off to a prison, which are surrounded by gender-neutral walls, and given a sort of Clockwork Orange-style re-education process where he becomes not a man. I think a part of him craves this so he could write his Solzhenitsyn manifesto in that gender-neutral wall, and his sort of manifesto against, I don't know, like Maoist, trans, whatever the fuck. So the Saudis are sort of giving him, they're giving him a little bit more credit. But I think, if I could speculate, I think that they are revealing Jordan's subconscious, if I may.
Raincourt is apparently a climate crank.
Oh, okay, that sounds about right. The Saudis have a lot to recommend here. Women should shut the fuck up. Climate change isn't real. Yeah, sounds good.
This is just from a cursory glance, but it looks like he got suspended for giving all of his Raincourt. This is all of his students A+ one semester, and the university used it, I think, probably as an excuse to take him out because of his climate dumbness. So, prisoner of conscience.
Right, exactly. Yeah, exactly. We're in jail. Raincourt was on one wall writing about why fossil fuels actually help fauna grow, and I was on the other wall writing about why the trannies were coming for me.
It's hilarious that they picked those 2 issues.
It's beautiful.
I wish Trudeau threw both of them in prison for what they're up to.
Yeah, if Trudeau threw both of them in prison, he'd get himself a shout-out in TMBS.
In like some cold prison in like northern Manitoba or something.
Yellowknife.
That'd be amazing. Like Trudeau's just like, work on your Solzhenitsyn cover album now, you fucking loser.
Plenty of time to write the intro. You'll have personal experience, buddy.
Yeah, it won't all just be in your fantasy life and delusions of grandeur anymore, you fucking prick.
You won't have to talk about how you sat in Canada watching America become the world's #1 incarceral state while you read Alexander Solzhenitsyn about how bad Russia is.
See, because as far as I could see it, I was always a little confused because, I mean, obviously, secretly, I'm a major communist, and I thought Solzhenitsyn was bourgeoisie trash. But I will say this, at least he was, like, in Siberia and whatnot, because I thought, well, you were whining, you were flying off to L.A. to do Rogan, so I was confused. But I think now we can help you out here.
Stalin made a lot of the Gulag prisoners go do media appearances across the empire.
Stalin was like, a big part of suppressing you is making sure that you have daily radio hits and your newspaper columns are in every single...
We're sending you to China. We got it. That relationship is not going well.
It's like, fuck, I think Stalin's going to send me on a press blitz to China, which means I'm totally out. Oh, that's great. You're calling from a 760 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is Kentucky Fried Comrade. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Thanks for calling. What's on your mind?
Just following. So I've got 2 things, but following up on the Jordan Peterson thing.
Right.
How does this fare for splitting him with like the Sam Harris anti-theist coalition in terms of like now he's officially endorsed by like the #1 theocratic state in the like world?
I don't think it matters.
He did a free Raif Badawi.
Yeah, he did a free Raif Badawi tweet, so he's in the clear. And by the way, I like the way Matt just said that because, of course, free her is an incredibly important and correct issue. But people like political prisoners in Saudi Arabia are just pawns for these people in their own far-right culture wars here.
Yeah, anyway, so the other thing I was going to get to, this is a little bit off the radar, but a couple months ago, the European Union began enacting GDPR, which maybe some people have heard of, maybe some haven't. But basically, it's the right to be forgotten data-wise on various internet platforms.
That's good.
And that's good. And we're seeing, this work we're seeing various ambiguities work its way through the courts already. But what I wanted to call in about is that, like, I actually work, how I survive day to day is I work for a company that is it's ostensibly a gaming company, and it's an application that none of you would ever suspect as being, weird or anything like that.
I would
But we
suspect
collect
that.
a lot of data.
I would suspect
you might,
that.
but
okay, I know. Fair point. I see what you mean. You guys collect a lot of data, and
when I say we collect a lot of data, we know every time you log into the application, what percentage your battery is at. We know what percentage. We know what percentage your battery is at. We know where you are located in the world.
Yep.
We know literally just about everything you would want to know about you aside from your text messages.
Right.
Our entire job is collecting data on you, and we disguise it as a gaming application.
Yep. Makes total sense. Yes. And
yeah.
So
I just kind of want to remind people of that. I want to see GDPR brought into this country, but I also want people to understand that, in terms of data collection, just about every application you have shares all the same data. If you even connect Facebook to another application, we get the data that Facebook has. It's that gross. So,
I mean, what do you think about because I've talked with Corey Pine about this, obviously, and everybody should read Live, Work, 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 Die. That's a journey to savage heart of Silicon Valley. But he was saying, I mean, first of all, there's no way of protecting yourself from this, right? Because it's a policy question. So you can do different things with your phone and, use WhatsApp or this or that or encrypt certain things. And those are probably all good ideas. And I think you're right to remind people. But I mean, fundamentally, isn't this something that just needs to be solved by policy?
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
we need policy. We need policy to solve this.
Right.
And when I say policy, very wide-ranging policy.
Right.
And even GDPR, as good as it is, it's brought up ambiguities all over the place. If I forget myself on Facebook, does that mean that my data is deleted to a third-party site, even though they've collected my data from Facebook? And you need policy to solve that question. And right now it's going to be solved by the courts. That's a European court question. And I'm not sure about the European court makeup or how that all fleshes out. But in the United States, that would be a right-wing court thing.
Right.
So,
and of course,
you need
Europe
policy
is definitely
to solve
better
that.
on these issues for sure. All right, man. Thank you for the call. That's important stuff. We're going to obviously be talking about that a lot more.
Have a good one.
You too.
Hashtag left is best.
Left is best. Great news. One of the great pieces of election news that happened, of course, on Tuesday was Rashida Tlaib getting elected to fill John Conyers' old seat. It's now going to be her seat. Representing parts of Detroit and Michigan.
It's a perfect replacement for how that sad situation.
Absolutely perfect replacement. Exactly. Don't miss the politics, but get rid of the misogyny. She will be and a lot more. Yes, that was an incredibly bleak, terrible story. She will be the first Muslim woman elected to Congress. There might be more in this class, but this is the first one so far. Her family, I believe, is of Palestinian descent. She's on CNN, and this is an interesting indication here of, obviously, I think Nancy Pelosi is really bad in many parts of her job, but most of the attacks on her in her caucus have come from the right in the Democratic caucus. This is an interesting sense of what might be coming at her from the left. Of course, Tlaib is Justice Democrat endorsed and has a sterling left record.
will you vote for Nancy Pelosi?
Probably not.
Probably not.
That's my answer. No, probably not.
Why not?
Look, I think for me, I need someone that, again, is connected with the different levels of poverty that's going on. The fact that there are structures and barriers for working families in my district that need to be dismantled, and supporting big banks and supporting efforts that I don't think put the people first is troubling. And I need somebody that fully understands why I'm so passionate about those issues, why I'm so eager to make sure their voices are heard. And at this point, even people back here, right here at home in Detroit, in the Metro Detroit area, they don't feel like they're being heard, and I think that starts at the top with leadership.
Is she one of the people you're referring to as a Democratic sellout?
Look, I don't know. All I can tell you is she doesn't speak about the issues that are important to the families of the 13th Congressional District, and they are a priority for me. They're the ones who put me here. They're the ones who put faith in me, and I have to listen to them, and I have to make sure that I never back down and that I don't sell out personally. And if that person that is in leadership is still okay to take away the transparency requirements for big banks, to making sure that my families are not being discriminated by, health care, being discriminated for getting health care coverage, or more importantly these days is about the fact that half of my families don't own their own homes in the 13th Congressional District because the discriminatory practices by big banks are still happening, and no one is doing anything about it. This is happening right now on their watch, and no one is talking about it. All they're doing is taking away, look at Dodd-Frank. I mean, look at what has been done just in the last 12 months in Congress. And again, that was done on specific people's watch and specific people's leadership, and that's something that I just can't forget.
She's great, and she's absolutely right. She's also 100% on board for Medicare for all, of course. And, Nancy Pelosi, the defense of her was that she's good at congressional maneuvering. I think she's certainly better than Chuck Schumer, but that's saying absolutely nothing. But she could have bought some benefit for herself by, at the very least, rhetorically being clear that she understood where things were, not only in terms of the sort of ideological shifts in the Democratic Party, but in literally the lived conditions of most people inside the Democratic base. And that's exactly what she's pointing out there. And that's exactly the front end of the argument, just like AOC in a different way in the last clip with the moral end. This woman's putting her constituents on the front end, right? The ideological questions are fundamentally important, but fundamentally this whole kind of battle, if we're going to simplify it, between socialist and third way or actual progressive versus corporatist is about, do you fundamentally value delivering for constituencies at the expense of all of the industries that are extracting from them, abusing them, and exploiting them? Or are you going to run interference for pharma, banks, and real estate, but throw some rhetorical crumbs? It's as simple as that. And the stats and the realities of her district summarize it. So, of course, Nancy Pelosi's not owed her vote.
She did the exact same thing Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez did with the just going off for like a minute and a half. And she's also a card-carrying DSA member. So
I didn't know that.
Yep, she is.
That's
so
great.
I mean, and that's really,
there it is.
This is how you have, this is how AOC is going to be more radical. This is how you need to have them. They need to have mass and gravity in there, and then we can start talking about like what they can really lead us to.
And even Barbara Lee in that third position, Barbara Lee needs to get that position, and Barbara Lee has a great record in Congress, and there's a difference between being like a kind of, progressive voice of conscience sort of person versus like, wait a second, there's actually a social and political and street momentum, and there's new people coming in, and there's people that I've already been fighting with. That helps, obviously that supports the new class, and that benefits Bernie Sanders and Barbara Lee and Ro Khanna and, all the people that are already pretty good. That's how it works.
And Pelosi's got to go, and while she's there, she needs to be used as a whipping post for progressive Democrats to say, I don't fuck with Pelosi. Fuck Pelosi.
100%, because that also detoxifies the brand. I mean, that's another great thing to do, because Republicans use Pelosi really effectively. I mean, you could just I don't care about Nancy Pelosi.
Those were the last ads they ran against Danny O'Connor in the 12th in Ohio. They said, he is probably going to endorse Pelosi.
Right. And now, but it's an important other lane because, you know, previously some of the people talking against Pelosi, you know, I think Tim Ryan from Ohio in some areas has actually some interesting ideas. And obviously I like the mindfulness stuff, but I mean, he's at third way events. I mean, he's talking a lot of bullshit. And, you know, if the alternative to Pelosi is, oh man, we just gotta like Joe Biden it in Ohio swing districts, you know, fuck all that. But if it's, no, we need to do real things here for real constituents, and don't paint me with that brush. And I'm not opposed to Pelosi because she's a San Francisco liberal. I'm actually opposed to her because he's a San Francisco corporatist, which is a much more accurate label in today's modern economy and world than this San Francisco liberal thing. That's one of the most unequal cities on the planet.
Yeah, what are the Republicans going to do about Pelosi? I'll actually go in and vote against her.
Right. I'll actually oppose her on
exactly,
you know, any number of key issues that affect people. And I'll also expose, you know, I like too that she also, because Pelosi has a decent voting record on paper, right? Like she usually casts a relatively progressive vote, but especially in a leadership position, what you whip on and also what you negotiate and what you allow to have happen, especially someone like Pelosi, who's very good at parliamentary maneuver, not to mention her just abysmal public appearances say a lot. You're calling from an 808 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, shit. Hey, guys, Sebastian from Honolulu.
Hey, Sebastian, what's going on?
Oh, fuck, I'm on a speaker. Let me turn it off. So, just a quick update in terms of like the
Actually, you should get back on speaker. I hear you. Or speak into the phone and just speak clearly and slowly, and we'll let you say what you got to say. Go for it.
All right, cool. So Hurricane Hector basically passed with no real issues here in Hawaii.
Great.
In terms of because I'm a volunteer for the Kaniela Inc. campaign.
Excellent.
Dues paying member of DSH. That's what we call it here.
Sweet.
Yeah, I changed it from DSA to DSH.
Sweet.
What else? Fuck. In terms of what I heard from the campaign, that we have a pretty strong ground game. But in terms of like when I do phone banking or just hearing stories from canvassing, there's still a lot of complacency here. So I guess concerned for our future, like we should all be, regardless.
Well, look, man, I got to say, I mean, Daniel Ng specifically, Kaniela Ng specifically is only 28. He's got many more things to do. And people got, like, I have to say, there was there's a Bill Scher column, and Bill Scher's actually literally, like, he's a good dude. I've known him for years. Obviously, completely different politics, but from the same town. And he used to do stuff with Sam and Jeannie back in the day. But, like, that Politico headline that, like, oh, you know, Abdul Saeed not getting the nomination, done for socialism, is just wrong. And conversely, though, I think people, you know, even when we have a bad night, we got to stop, you know, first of all, like, Tlaib is going to Congress. Missouri beat right to work. And you've also got crops of candidates now, like in Abdul Saeed. That guy's going nowhere. Kaniela Ng is going nowhere. Like, we're on the move, and part of taking risks and being part of an insurgency is that there are losses, and it's a learning process. So, you know, I get it. We're in a very grave situation, but certainly don't let one house race determine your level of sort of overall optimism.
I mean, definitely. I mean, I don't believe in inevitability, but yeah, communism, we need to make it win, more or less. But I mean, since it was the topic, like Jordan Peterson, that storm is coming here in November.
Oh God.
And yeah, and I'm just like wondering, like,
aloha.
Like, yeah, I don't want to give that fucker any of our money.
Right.
At the same time, like, how to, like, I mean, because like I go to a lot of like anti-Trump stuff, and we've got our own like chapter of Proud Boys, so it's a good thing to like identify who these fuckers are, because they're the ones who are the, like, I guess you could say like the freed corpse if shit goes down.
Yeah.
And But another thing, I mean, since Jamie isn't there, I don't really want to get into this thing, but like on Tuesday, she was talking about like how she's a libertarian socialist versus authoritarian, but I mean, I feel like that's kind of a ahistorical look about like how revolutions occur.
All right, well, hit her. You got to hit her. Yeah, don't bring, you know, I mean, in general, I get like, I mean, obviously for Sam, you can't, you know, you could bring stuff up that involves talking shit about Sam while I'm here is basically my point. But for everybody else, keep it classy.
Because because in terms of like people who have been converted like ideologically, like I would say that I was originally an anarcho-communist like my entire life, and like listening to Sam's like reasoning about how like it doesn't matter what you call yourself, it's just a matter of getting shit done and improving people's lives. So like I guess I've converted to like Marxist-Leninism, Sederism. Like I see him as my chairman in a way.
Wow. Well, that's really disturbing in its own way. No, I agree with you. I mean, obviously, we had to talk about this on the TMBS postgame, and I think the word socialism means and conveys certain really important and distinct things, and I'm willing to kind of like go through the body blows on that with some people to explain things that actually matter. But I think in general, yeah, I'm exceedingly not worried about terminology mostly. And I'm much more concerned about delivery and real, you know, that type of thing.
I mean, and these things are, they become what they are, right? Like the DSA is becoming something. It's not, nobody's really guiding what it's organic. Becoming. Like, and you have, of course, you have debate and fierce debates over that. And I actually think that is the best way for those things to organically develop. But like, what is socialism meant in like the 20th century versus what democratic socialism is going to mean in an American context over the next 50 years, I think are different things. And I'm not too concerned with trying to guide that missile right now. I think there's more important things to worry about than like that terminology.
Indeed. Appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for all the Solzhenitsyn slams. Those are dope.
That's funny. I love it. I'm not really trying to slam him, but
but that's what happens when Penguin Classics puts Jordan Peterson on the introduction. Is fuck Solzhenitsyn now?
No, that's exactly right. You took a really important historical figure in his context, and you've reduced it to the garbage of the moment. You're calling from a 312 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, a couple days ago, you had a Navy veteran call in who grew up in poverty and like joined the military and sort of became radicalized.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to sort of share that sentiment because basically have the same story. You know, I joined the Navy out of poverty, and when I got out, I sort of had a hard time swallowing the fairy tale that we can't do things like free healthcare or housing or cooperate like that socially, because ironically the United States military is basically like the, you know, workers' utopia. Paid paternity leave, free healthcare for all, housing if you need it, you know, food for everybody. And like, I'm hoping that more veterans who are listening to this will call in or find other mediums to speak out and share their experiences. Yeah, that's basically all I just wanted to say.
Awesome, man. Appreciate the call.
Yeah, is it Nate Bethea? He was on I was telling you a Nostalgia Trap.
Oh, okay.
And they were talking about this exact same thing. But yeah, that like there's obviously like MAGA issues. There's like MAGA veterans, but there's also veterans that realize like, oh crap, like I grew up with this GI Bill, or I, you know, got this, my college paid for, and I have healthcare. Like, yeah, this shit should be everybody's.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate the call.
Am I still on the line?
Yeah, you still are. Go ahead.
The other thing that was kind of cool about the experience is, you know, I was on an aircraft carrier in the Pacific Ocean with 5,000 people, right? But those 5,000 people were just randomly plucked up out of the country. So you had, you know, I worked in an electronics lab with people from Texas. My boss was from Bend, Oregon, and he had never met a black person in his life until he was on the carrier.
Wow.
And it was like a really cool social experiment where if you're, have a shred of like human decency or the capacity to listen to other people, you can't walk out of the military and be blind to the issues that face people of different, minority communities.
Right.
And
right.
That was just like another really cool aspect about the military. It was really weird. Like, I came in expecting it to be like full of conservatives, like jackbooted people, like I grew up poor, like I already came in with some sort of suspicion that I'm poor from Chicago too. Like, I've seen cops do some like really jacked up stuff. So I kind of came in like, with one eye open, so to speak, when I went into the military, like had my guard up. But it's full of like left-leaning people, and I really just hope that they speak out more, because we have not like a platform like you guys, but we have somewhat of a platform being veterans. Like,
totally,
we're Abby
100%.
Martin sort of speaks about how like veterans are deified in America, especially if you get more to like the MAGA side. They just like have a real hard-on for veterans.
Right.
After I got out of the Navy, the first thing I did was I got a hammer and sickle tattooed on my shoulder. And I know that sounds kind of stupid, but really it's just sort of, you can't forget the lessons I learned. It's not somewhere visible. It's really just for me. But I also went to Standing Rock, right, to help the Native peoples, defend their land. I thought it was like a little bit like tacky, like really we're still trying to steal land from Native Americans. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, like give it a rest. But on the way out of there, I was listening to a talk show. It was like one of those right-wing syndicated fucking Rush Limbaugh clones.
Right.
And they had like a congressman for the Dakotas on there, and he was talking about how all these veterans went to Standing Rock, and he was saying stuff like, oh, they're like building bombs there and blah, blah. And I called up and I was super respectful. I was like, hey, sir, like I'm a guest in your state. Like, I spent some time in the camp, and, I've been around munitions and ordnance, and I didn't see anything to indicate that there was anything like that going on. But I'm not from here, so if you have like information about that, I'd really like to know, and like I'd hope that you'd be willing to share that with me. And he started like pushing these talking points, but as soon as I let him know I was a veteran, it was a total 180. Like, whoa, thank you for your service. I gotta go.
Oh, that's awesome.
That put them in a very iffy situation, actually, because they might have handled it well in that case, but there was other guys who were saying that veterans with like PTSD and stuff were coming up and being taken advantage of by the Dakota Access Pipeline protesters, which like you could tell how much panic it would take for somebody to go there.
Oh, totally. I mean, no, but I think, man, I just appreciate everything. That's an awesome call. I hope you call in again.
Yeah, absolutely, man. I love your show, and keep doing what you're doing. I really appreciate it.
All right.
Also, Jordan Peterson sucks.
Thanks, brother. You're calling from an 832 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, guys. This is Derek from the Woodlands.
From where?
From the Woodlands, Texas.
Oh, hey. What's
going
on?
Right outside of Houston. How's it going? So I called in last week about my best friend's girlfriend turning into a neo-Nazi.
Yes.
And over the weekend, a video went viral. I guess in the Houston area. I'm not sure if it went that far, but of these dudes who got thrown out of a local bar in Houston for using racial slurs and like causing a ruckus and trying to fight people.
Yeah.
And so they like found out, they kind of doxed one of the dudes, I guess. And they found out that he was in a local metal band, and they like kicked him out of the band, which is cool. But he is also in a PhD program at U of H. And they got him out of he was a TA, and he resigned that position. But what I wanted to focus on, really, and I think is interesting, is that with these fascists, like he put out a statement saying that this was a attempt, that he was being, I guess, like stalked or whatever by Antifa, that old chestnut.
Yeah, all that shit. Yep.
And
yep.
that
is he a
he goes, Yeah, and so yeah, he's a plot. So they go. So then he said, he's like, I'm not a fascist. I'm paraphrasing because he deleted it because he said that he was a nationalist, as if that was better, you know,
or different.
And he went on this. Yeah.
Again, the importance and lack of importance of terminology.
Right.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And then he goes on to say that he's just, he's unafraid to talk about race, and he's just worried about concerned about immigration. Well, so that's awesome too. Like, anyway. So then so somebody, I guess, found pictures of him because his Facebook profile was public with with like this, I guess like Nazis are like getting more clever, and they don't do swastikas anymore. They do the black, like Nazi sun, right? That's what it's called, I think.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
And so he has that tattooed on his chest.
Right.
And there's pictures like it's like we're not stupid, you know. And interestingly, because apparently I'm the Kevin Bacon of fashion, Houston, and like 6 degrees of separation. I played one of my last metal shows, bass player, and this guy was like hitting on my girlfriend the whole time. And I'm cool. My girlfriend's hot. I get it. You know, what your man got to do with me? You know, and so then we found out this is the same guy.
By the way, that's begging.
Like
that is begging for a Bill Clinton cover. By the way, what's your man got to do with me? I'm trying to hear that.
I'm trying to hear that. See.
What?
Yeah, but my girlfriend was really creeped out, and then now she was like freaking out about this because she's Jewish, and so she was like, "What if I told this guy that I was Jewish when he was like trying to hit on me, like, you know, because he's a Nazi, you know?" And that's another thing that really made it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, like,
I mean, but it's just perfect because it's like all the word games and all the bullshit. I mean, look, I think we're having it right now. We are really there is a dividing line here, and I think the people who were like, just kind of exploring things, and maybe they saw some tendencies and things that were identified as left that they didn't like or whatever, they're starting to get it, and to some degree, and then the others, and they're still, I mean, Laura Ingraham is doing white nationalist talking points on TV. Tucker Carlson, white nationalist talking points every single night. The administration is a white nationalist administration. I'm not in any way minimizing it, but yeah, they're showing the ball. And,
actually, On the Media just had a good podcast on the Overton window that I think people should check out. But also, I think it's important to have the conversation about how they try to hide their fascism and their racism, because like I was saying in his quote unquote apology, right? Like he's trying to get around saying that he's a fascist by playing this terminology, and like Angela Nagel points out in Kill All Normies, they try to they're not going to tell you outright, like they're trying to convince the normies,
they're trying to convince
that they're not racist.
Yes.
And anybody who says normie, by the way, unironically, I guess, is a fucking fascist. Like, you could pretty much just I don't ever refer to anybody as a normie, Like, the only reason I know that terminology is because I'm fascinated with this whole fascist culture that,
I use it as a compliment,
I don't know.
And I usually generally mean by, people that are not on their computers all the time.
Ashley Feinberg.
Yeah.
Appreciate the call, man.
Ashley Feinberg in the Huffington Post. There's a leaked style guide for Nazis for how they talk about these things, and it was all written up and leaked. And yeah, exactly, that's the game. And guess what? I've seen explicitly people talk about, say, Sargon of Akkad, and in what his place is in those sorts of guys in this constellation.
Right.
And they refer to him as I could never cuck that hard myself personally, meaning that I could never act that rational, classic libertarian like he does, because I like to just lean in with the racism.
Let's just say it.
I got to be true to me. Yeah.
But they're all getting there. That's all it. That is the position. Colin from Nebraska. We're heading to Colorado to smoke some weed. 420 Blaze It Shofar. Sure. Have a nice trip. Okay.
I feel like if we were a left-wing show like 15 years ago, that would be more exciting. But like now it's sort of used to weed being legal.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Right. We're like, all right.
I found it harder to buy beer in Colorado than to buy weed when
Well,
I was out there.
If you don't want to just stick to edibles, you need to have a place to smoke it in Colorado, which is well, I mean, you can just do it outside, but you might get ticketed.
Hashtag Condal. Thank you for raising awareness about prison labor issues, which absolutely amounts to slavery. The 13th Amendment left one major loophole where you can't be a slave unless you've been convicted of a crime, and the U.S. developed a system to criminalize blackness and poverty. These so-called volunteers signed up to reduce their sentences and are often paid less than $1 a day. Still, I have heard what accounts of prisoners were fed McDonald's meals for lunch and then informed afterward that they would get no reduction of their sentences because they ate the food. It's an absolute slavery in the 21st century. I don't know. I mean, I will look into those stories, but I think it's despicable. And yes, every day that people are forced to suffer under it is a moral outrage. Free all prisoners, disarm the police. Left is best. Ben Shapiro is 5'4". Right-wing media is full attack mode over AOC. Every Dem primary is being tied to her and her failed movement, according to them. I think they are genuinely scared that they will lose the white working class, so they have to amp up the race hate. I think they also know the establishment Dems always cower and cave to right-wing attacks, so they're banking on Pelosi wing to make sure AOC and Bernie's message does not spread. Too bad, cucks. We here. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
That's the attitude. Stop being defeatist.
Beautiful. I wish I ended on that. I am. That's exactly right. It's fucking perfect. Vespa. Good friend of mine says that Nunez recording, which happened here in Spokane, shouldn't be validated because two-party two-party recording laws in Washington. But he was up in his arms about James O'Keefe Acorn debacle years ago, which faced the same issue but was actually invalidated because of it. Insanity coming full circle. They can't escape the truth as much as they try. Let's play that. Of course, the new line being trotted out, it's been, well, I think Trump's been actually, that's been part of his sort of spray of nonsense for a while. But Rudy Giuliani came out recently. So I looked in the Constitution. I can't see it's not a crime. Devin Nunes, apparently at this private fundraiser, has a different thought about what collusion is. And who knows, maybe these thoughts might be extremely relevant for somebody like Devin Nunes to know.
So therein lies, so it's like your classic catch-22 situation where, I mean, we're at what puts us in such a tough spot. If Sessions won't unrecuse and Mueller won't clear the president, we're the only one, which is really the danger. That's why and thank you for saying it, by the way. I mean, we have to keep all these things. We have to keep the majority. If we do not keep the majority, all of this goes away.
Like he's like, it actually could be a really serious crime. And if we lose Congress, we might be accountable for, I don't know, crimes. Yeah.
I struggle to see how that's a catch-22.
Yeah, there's
just so we need to cover our asses.
Right. It's not a catch-22 to say that you need to keep control of institutions so you're not held accountable for your potentially criminal behavior.
Total catch-22, bro.
Yeah, exactly. It's like fucking catch-22s where you got to make sure that the cops don't find you committing a crime.
It's like these Russians were telling me about adoption, and then they're like, hey, we also got some documents we might help leak. And it was a total catch-22. What was I supposed to do, not go?
Yeah, it was super catch-22. It's like, my mom was like, we found the weed, so you're suspended. I was like, catch-22, dude. Fuck.
That's the best defense, because then you leave people trying to solve the puzzle of, wait, how is this a catch-22?
I've been mulling that over in my mind since he said it.
Exactly.
That is the most intelligent thing Devin Nunes has ever done.
I filled up a notebook with sort of graphs and sort of mathematical. I'm trying to solve for it. It's trigonometry.
It's the old catch-22 where they hold you accountable for your crimes. You guys know what I'm talking about. So yeah, you keep us in control of Congress, or that 22 is gonna come around the other end.
Oh, Fascists are so fucking stupid.
They are
fucking
stupid.
That's the thing is like, that's the thing we've sort of learned over the last like 3 years is that yes, these are dumb people, and that dumbness is funny to point to and monetize on YouTube. But it doesn't matter because they can still be super effective and almost more effective because they're that dumb.
Well, part of the modern microhistory, like in the last couple of years, if we freeze it, if we kind of shrunk it, would be like stupid people can be incredibly ruthless and effective. And a lot of people who are smart enough really overestimated their intelligence. Like that would describe the sort of, the Clinton technocracy world. You're calling from a 410 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hi, it's Leslie from Penn State. Hello.
Hey, Leslie, what's going on?
Two things. First thing real quick. Yesterday was my birthday, so can I get a birthday shofar?
Yes, you can. Happy birthday.
Yay! Yeah, I can drink legally now. I'm very happy about that.
Well, make sure you drink a lot of water too, and
yes,
enjoy yourself.
I don't even drink soda, man. I drink like water and sometimes vodka.
Nice.
So,
wow, it's very healthy. All right, good for you.
So I actually originally called in to talk about this whole Nunez thing, but I've been on the line for an hour, and you guys kind of just got to that. So would you mind if I expounded on that a little bit?
Sure. Take a minute.
So one thing that some people are saying is in the beginning of the statement you guys played is he says, if Sessions won't unrecuse and Mueller won't clear the president, we're the only ones, as in implying that we're the only ones who can protect the president. Some people are saying that is sort of almost an admit. Yeah, that's like Nunez, right? They're saying that's almost like an admission that he's planning to protect Trump regardless of what the investigation finds, which would basically amount to obstruction of justice. And I don't know, it's just like they're getting like more and more obvious with their corruption.
I think how I would interpret that is that, I mean, impeachment is a political process, and they're just going to decide not to impeach him over it. And I don't think that's
I don't think non-impeach. That wouldn't be obstruction of justice. But they are just saying. I mean, but you're right in the kind of broader themes. Like, this is just about power, and they want to keep power to protect power, and that's a pretty blunt. I mean, the only part of that clip that everybody's overestimating is the likelihood of a Democratic House impeaching Trump. But that's a totally valid thing to say to your fundraisers, because, again, this is another good time to remind everybody that the Republican Party is totally synchronized. They're not going to hold Trump accountable. They don't want to hold Trump accountable.
He's accountable to them, and he's doing what they want.
Precisely. So there you go. They should be thanking Donald Trump every single day because he is the perfect Republican president, just as he's the perfect Republican candidate. A fusion of oligarchy and white identity politics. Thanks a million for the phone call. Happy birthday. You're calling from a 610 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Michael. Can you hear me?
Yes, with the final call of the day. You're on 610. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've been wanting to call in for a couple months now, and I finally got around to it. Okay.
Nice. What's up?
So I wrote down what I wanted to say, so I'll be quick as possible.
Nice.
So I talked to my father the other day, who was a Trump supporter. Both my parents are Trump supporters, and I don't usually push on these political conversations anymore because I've found it's pretty pointless. But I was talking with him, and he told me something that was just too ridiculous that I had to push back on. And he told me that Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said that they support open borders, and I was like, that doesn't sound right. So then after I pushed back on it, he well, you see, after I pushed back on it, he gave a response that I found, and you can give your opinion, but I found it to be more sophisticated than I thought it was going to be. And he said that essentially, like, if people don't come out and say that I'm for open borders, they end up doing so if they're advocating for other things such as abolishing ICE, sanctuary cities, all these things, which I think is a brilliant debate tactic because it changes it from, you know, like saying that you're wrong to trying to explain a policy position, which usually, like, even if you're right, you don't come out looking strong.
I have to say, in a debate situation, I never concede a tactic like that. It's like, well, they don't, so I don't care all the stuff you just said.
Yeah, bringing up theoretical arguments on the left, I think, are useful in those situations.
Yeah, you're just bringing up side points. They don't support the policy, and then you know, if you want to go down a whole road of what supporting certain things means about other things, let's talk about why the president you support is a neo-Nazi. Like, okay, right. I can play that game.
So I think
better than you.
Yeah. So the people that are on the left, who, you know, in whatever context it is, I think that they have to reframe the argument. So you don't have to buy into the right's framing of that. I agree with that. So I think I want to give my opinion, then you can respond. So generally speaking, I believe if you want to go after people who come here illegally and that's their only crime, they otherwise lead productive lives, like your motivations are racist in my view.
Right, definitely.
But I think some of the time a portion of it can come from ignorance to how illegal immigrants contribute to the country through billions of dollars in taxes, and you know, again, the right just smears us, like they said, abolishing ICE is the same as abolishing law enforcement. So we know that these things are ridiculous. But my opinion is, we have to. I think we have to win on the issue of immigration to get broader support across the nation. But would you agree that we have to make our case on immigration relentlessly, or do you think that we should spend our time focusing on other issues like Medicare for all, like put that at the forefront?
Definitely put Medicare for all. Definitely put Medicare for all at the forefront. And also, you're wrong, unfortunately, in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. Because one, again, this is the classic sorting technique that I always use, but I don't know any other way to use it. Say there is a small amount of a persuadable population, say it's 1 or 2%. The Obama to Trump people, okay, whatever. And they are concerned legitimately about issues that they associate in their minds with immigration, but really are not about immigration, like wage stagnation. That ain't about immigration. That's about capitalism. It's about corporations.
Yeah.
If you can explain what you're going to do for them, and of course in a way that in no way plays to xenophobia or conspiracy theories, and they go, oh, okay, that makes sense to me. And then maybe also there's a whole other set of civic and cultural initiatives that could be totally worthwhile. Like, hey, this city is different now, so we're going to build, commissions of different groups of people coming together to, celebrate the 4th of July together, celebrate different people's, cultural events together, go to each other's, pubs or whatever. Awesome. That's really important. Multiculturalism goes both ways, and that's a great thing to do. For the vast majority of people, no matter how many word games they play with it, they are in that racist category. They opposed Obama on immigration, even when Obama's immigration policies were far to the right. He was deporting people at a rapid clip. And their issue is what Laura Ingraham said, the changing demographics of the country, because they are racist.
How much money it brings in does not matter.
How much money immigrants bring in. In fact, if you really want to go down that road, I've seen, even just anecdotally, I've seen it flip on a dime from they contribute nothing to, oh yeah, that's right, all these fucking, Indian and Nigerian doctors are making our money. Because it's racism. And in Brexit, we just went through this even more vividly because, in fact, Brexit and the xenophobia game there, like, they have numbers there literally, like, sustaining things like the NHS. Like, they need people. from outside of the country making and contributing that money. Like, not in the way here of like, yes, of course, a lot of people come and they contribute. Absolutely. But it, you know, in the UK, literally things you rely on every day are dependent on a labor force that has come into this country, and people in that demographic are driven by racism and xenophobia. And as I say, I think there's a variety of ways to address that in the big picture. But as far as campaigning on immigration, no, fuck that. No, they just need to be defeated. And in fact, what the Democrats should be saying is all of the other issues we've talked about, and then demilitarizing borders for sure. Appreciate the call, man. Thank you. Okay, a few more IMs, then we got to get out of here. Hey, Michael, great interview today. Although I missed some at the beginning, I'm quite ignorant of Brazilian elections. So, if you will, regards to Lula's imprisonment, is it not an option to have somebody represent Lula as a candidate as a vessel for Lula's politics? Yes, they've done that. Fernando Haddad is the backup scenario, which we did. I think we went over that in the interview. Jay Cool, hey Michael, what do you think anything positive will come out of the Saudi feud with Canada? And are you surprised the EU has hardly said anything? I'm not surprised the EU has hardly said anything, and it's already created a lot of entertaining content. Nick in Pittsburgh, I mean, not to be glib, I don't think, no, not in the short term. Although I actually think that's a case where revealing everybody's hypocrisy and double standards is clarifying, and that's an innately positive thing in that instance. Nick from Pittsburgh, Michael, I enjoyed the fudge out of your recent chat with Douglas Lane on Zero Square podcast. It's easily top 10 in my opinion. I highly recommend it to all MR/TMBS peers. Peeps, would you give any of the juicy details about the book you're working on? When can we expect it? Can't wait, man. Left is best. I appreciate it. We're working on it. I mean, I'm aiming to get a draft done by October, and it's a sort of much, I mean, I don't know, for much more polemical. It's sort of like Hitchens meets Kill All Normies targeted at the dark web. Train Boy, what do you think of the D.C. City Council voting to overturn recently passed ballot initiative that mandated servers and restaurants be paid an actual minimum wage instead of much lower tip wage? I think it's disgraceful, and this isn't being clever. Clearly, we don't need Russians to overturn democracy in America. That is absolutely disgraceful.
They overturn that?
I didn't know that.
Fuck,
we need to be on that. That's fucking disgusting. Okay. All right. And let's see. And let me find the final IM of the day. Let's see. Final IM of the day. Jack from Minnesota. Later, dude. I got to catch some 22s. All right, guys. We're back live tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the light bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kick in, and my pilot light shining bright. I guess somewhere the choice was made for the option where you don't get paid, for the road that bends before it finally breaks you. I guess somehow I lost my drive